Good evening. The June 28th, 2023 regular meeting of the Murrieta Planning Commission is called to order. Would the secretary call roll for determination of a quorum, please?
Thank you, Chair. Chair Fisher?
Here.
Vice Chair Harlan?
Here.
Commissioner Bruman?
Here.
Commissioner Wojcik?
Here.
Commissioner LaPaglia? Let the record reflect all members are present with the exception of Commissioner LaPaglia.
I'd like to have the Pledge of Allegiance done, and Commissioner Roman will help us in that.
Please stand and join me as we salute our nation's flag and the principles thereof. Put your hand over your heart. Ready? Begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We will now be moving on to the approval of the agenda. Are there any changes to the agenda?
Seeing none.
Seeing none, I'm calling for a motion and a second to approve the agenda.
Make a motion to approve.
Commissioner Harlan approves.
I'll second the motion.
Commissioner Varum seconds the motion. May we have a vote?
Chair Fisher?
Yes.
Vice Chair Harlan?
Aye.
Commissioner Bruman?
Aye.
Commissioner Wojcik?
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. At this time, we will take public comments. Any person may address the Planning Commission on any subject pertaining to city business, which does not relate to any item listed on the agenda or the consent calendar. Normally, no action may be considered or taken by the Planning Commission on any matter not listed on the agenda. Speakers are limited to 3 minutes. Madam Secretary, do we have any non-agenda public comments?
Thank you, Chair. We do not have non-agenda public comments.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. We are now moving on to the public hearing. The public hearing is Hillside Updates DCA 2021-2396 to amend chapters 8.20 and 15.52 of the Murrieta Municipal Code and to amend the Murrieta Development Code Title 16 for the purpose of revising and updating chapters 16.08, 16.10, 16.11, 16.12, 16.13, 16.14, 16.18, 16.22, 16.24, 16.28, and the new sections 16.24.080 entitled Exceptions, 16.24.090 entitled Reserved, and 1624.100 entitled Hillside Overlay Map, and 1624.110 entitled Prominent Ridgelines Map. Are there any members of the Planning Commission that wish to abstain or recuse themselves? Seeing none, we will move on to the staff presentation. Staff, may we have the staff report?
Thank you, Chair Fisher. Yeah, with us tonight for the Hillside Updates, we have Chris Tracy, Senior Planner.
Thank you, Carl. Good evening, Planning Commission Chair and Commissioners. Tonight I'll be providing an ordinance introduction for our proposed Hillside Updates with a recommended action. First, I'm going to provide some background on how we got here, as we may have some new members out in the public viewing this remotely. So I just want to provide some context for everyone. The City Council adopted the general plan in 1994 following incorporation of the city in 1991. At that time, the city used the Riverside County development standards until it had its own zoning code. In September 1997, the city began the process for adopting its own zoning code. It had a joint planning commission and council workshops at that time to develop standards. In early 1998, the city implemented these new standards. Inclusive of these new standards were parameters covering hillside development. Other than some minor changes in 2003, the hillside development standards have remained relatively unchanged since adoption back then. Switching gears here, I'm just going to cover why we're proposing this today. Staff has discovered inconsistent standards between the existing development code sections that may challenge interpretations of the current standards. Feedback from some project applicants is that the standards currently are overly complicated and have not been consistently applied. This is having an impact on our ability to streamline our review process and maybe a hindrance with project review. Continuing with this, staff was directed by the council at its annual priorities workshop last year to address this issue within the code. Next, when these standards were initially adopted, the standards were applied on a citywide basis and not specifically to designated areas within the city, which should have been the case, and I want to highlight that point especially. And finally, the overall goal for these updates is to provide concise and accurate direction for everyone involved. On your screen here is the hillside overlay exhibit, just for reference. I'm going to be going back and forth to this exhibit several times throughout the presentation, but I just wanted to set that for the framework. Briefly, I'll just cover some public outreach efforts with respect to these updates. Back last year on August 25th, we had a presentation to the Development Advisory Group to receive feedback on the proposed standards. The Development Advisory Group were supportive of the proposed changes. As you may recall, earlier this year on January 25th, we had a presentation in a workshop format to the Planning Commission, and we had a number of questions and we went through that exercise. More recently, on April 11th, at the Alderwood Park Clubhouse, staff hosted a community workshop presentation on the existing and proposed standards, and we had several members of the public join us for that discussion and overview. We also did, we prepared a city webpage for this, where the public could go to review the proposed updates and provide feedback. So there's a screenshot of that there. And just finally, just for context, with respect to the specific plans, Greer Ranch and Copper Canyon, portions of the overlay map cover both Greer Ranch and Copper Canyon. Staff will be updating the map to pull these areas out of the overlay because they have their own standards specific to hillside development. They stand on their own. Specific plans serve as standalone documents with their own unique development standards within a defined area. They would have their own development standards, as I mentioned, for hillside areas. However, they still have to abide by the city's general plan, goals, and policies with respect to hillside development. So there's still that overarching objective there. Next, I'll just be covering the proposed updates in detail, and I'm just going to be kind of walking through it as it's provided in the ordinance, kind of step by step, as Carl mentioned earlier. For the first portion of the updates, we have tables 1608-3 and -4. This is where you would go to find the maximum building height and if the property is within a hillside area. And the second portion of these updates are just cross-referencing for the retaining wall criteria. It's kind of the same deal for the next couple tables here, 1610-2, 11-2, and 12-2, with the footnotes and just that retaining wall information. Same here for 1613-2 and 14-2. I won't go through that again. Pivoting here, I'm just going to go through 1618-80. This is height measurement and height limit exceptions. On your screen is our current standard on how height is measured on a slope and also on a pad. As previously covered in the workshop, the standard has created issues with how to measure on a slope, especially because you have a million data points when someone's trying to do that exercise. So it's really complicated. The solution from this, as provided within the proposed ordinance, would be first selecting a high point and then a low point as reference grade points. If the difference in elevation is 10 feet or less, the reference grade point is established on the highest adjacent elevation, and this is under figures 1618-2 and -4 on your screen there. If the difference in elevation is greater than 10 feet, the reference grade point is established 10 feet above the lowest adjacent ground elevation. This is on -3 and -5 on your screen. So what we're trying to do there is provide a 10-foot area to work with on a slope. where someone could have a crawl space and still meet, not having an overly tall structure. And under this scenario, chimneys, vent pipes would still be allowed to exceed this limit up to 15%, and that's currently in the code today, so we're carrying that over. Continuing this for a proposed pad location, which is 99% of our lots in the city, nothing's changing there. The vertical distance is from the finished grade to the height of the roof line, and that's our current standard, as I mentioned. Next, I'll just be covering our retaining wall standards here. We didn't get to talk about that at the workshop, but I'm going to kind of go over that in more detail here. This section currently refers to 2 retaining wall standards as it is today. We have a facing outward standard and an inward standard. However, there's some other missing components in there, such as addressing line of sight with the visibility triangles. So if someone's backing up out of a driveway or turning a corner, the pedestrian and vehicle can still see each other and have that 30-foot high wall, or 30-inch high wall, I should say. Required offset for a step back, general design criteria, and cross-referencing to retaining wall criteria within a hillside area. What we're trying to do here is make it in a table format so it's easier for everyone to follow, for project applicants and city staff. And this table would apply citywide, excluding those hillside areas. So that's kind of the difference there. And I'll go through it in more detail in the next couple of slides. On your screen here are some very tall existing retaining walls that we have in our city. And as a way to just kind of soften this condition, a potential solution that has been discussed is a step back at a height and use of crib walls with landscaping to kind of help screen those areas. On the left screen here is a step back condition. It's wide enough to have trees and landscaping. On the right side's an example of a crib wall with landscaping, but it doesn't have the step back, so you still have a really tall wall. So we're trying to think of something kind of maybe in between as a design option. On your screen here is the table, and I'm just going to walk through it from top to bottom. First, on the first row, for a retaining wall facing outward within the front or street side setback, an applicant would be looking at a 4-foot maximum height. That's within the setback. That's our current standard today. So we're just carrying that over. Second, for the second row, the retaining wall facing inward, an applicant would be looking at a 6-foot high maximum height. So say if you have a parking lot, you would have a wall facing in towards that parking lot, the maximum height 6 feet. That's the current standard today. So we're just carrying that over into the table. For the third row, this is the line of sight item as I described. Maximum height would be 30 inches at those visibility triangles at driveway cutoffs, and that's just for line of sight, so you have your safety issues addressed with that. This is the bottom portion of that same table. So for the first row, for a retaining wall 6 feet or greater, it would be subject to the same setback requirements as the main structure. This is our current standard. For the second row there, we're proposing an offset. At 12 feet in height, the retaining wall would then be pulled back 6 feet to accommodate landscaping. And this was suggested at our development advisory group meeting at the 12-foot threshold. So that's where that came from. For the third row and fourth rows, this is just a cross-reference to the retaining wall design criteria, and if the wall happens to be in the hillside overlay, the other table, and I'll go into that later in this presentation. Continuing with this, we just have some minor renumbering with table 3-3 to table 16-22-1, and also just minor updates. I won't go into too much detail there. Next, we have updates for 1622-50, measurement of fence and wall height, and the objective here is just to clarify how that measurement is, and also we're providing parameters for when there's a difference in ground level between 2 adjacent properties and how that's determined. Next, just a cleanup of errors within the business park, general industrial A zones with respect to walls, incorporation of the innovation zone criteria, which is currently not there. So that's just what we're doing with those updates under 1622-60. Next, we have our centralized design criteria, and this would apply to retaining walls. We are adding parameters for keystone walls and crib walls and other similar living wall systems as a design option for someone. And then the next section we have is updates is just on just minor typographical items there. Next is 162420. This is our hillside slopes. So the issue has been on how they apply and where. So right now we have this description in the code that references a 20% threshold when the intention was 25%. So the code will address everything at 25% or greater as a hillside condition moving forward within that chapter. So that's kind of the background on that. And this slide kind of covers that as well, so I won't go into that again. Here is our average slope calculation, and we're proposing to remove this and utilizing GIS. We talked about that at the workshop a bit, you know, there seemed to be consensus on that move. Next, I'm going to go over a couple slides here with prominent ridge lines. An issue that has come to attention is the misapplication of prominent ridge lines. Today, Chapter 1624 provides some very vague language on defining where these are. We also have some parameters that structures are not permitted to be closer to a prominent ridge than 50 feet as measured vertically on a cross section or 150 feet horizontally. So at the top of a prominent ridge line, you have this triangle, this no-build triangle, and we're trying to address that item for folks that have properties at those locations with another way to help soften that visual issue. One method for addressing the prominent ridge lines item is having it mapped and precisely provided in the GIS, as we kind of talked about at the workshop. And this will help with project review for both project applicants and city staff. And on your screen here in the red areas, that's our prominent ridgeline areas, just for reference, and we kind of covered this last time a bit. As I mentioned, kind of the balance here is we want to try to you know, protect the visual ridge lines, but also provide some flexibility for for property owners that want to, you know, have an addition here or there or do something with their property in the future. And one method has been suggested is using landscaping as a way to screen homes along, you know, those areas. So that was kind of covered in the workshop. So that's kind of what we're proposing in the ordinance as provided. We also have some definition updates. We're providing new definitions consistent with other portions of the code, including city engineer, city manager, and director. We're correcting, updating existing definitions with other sections as well, providing new slope examples with the inclusion of a 25% slope example, which is currently missing, and clear graphics. We have a variety of updates to 162440, and this covers existing standards for the submittal of a natural features maps, conceptual grading plans, drainage maps, slope analysis, profile drawings, and things of that nature. Also, we're moving from more of a subjective interpretation as provided in the code currently to an objective manner, and this is consistent with how the state wants us to be describing things for project review. The next section here is 162450 that we'll be updating. We're just cross-referencing back to that hillside overlay map on how it applies. Just clarification of the commission to mean planning commission. Updates to reference objective criteria. And this is that other retaining wall table. And this would be specific to hillside areas. So that's the difference between that prior table I went through. I'm just going to walk through it really quick like the last one. For the first row, for a retaining wall within a front or street side setback, a 3-foot maximum height would be permitted. The 3-foot standard is currently in place today. For the second row, for any line of sight areas, a proposed maximum height would be 30 inches for safety issues. For the third row, a 6-foot high maximum height would be set for terraced walls. This is the current standard, so we're just carrying that over. For the fourth row here, a wall over 6 feet is prohibited, and that's currently in the code today. For the first row, for a retaining wall over 6 feet as part of a structure, this may exceed that height, provided that it's you know, incorporated through grading and landscape treatments, and that's currently in the code today. For the second row, at 6 feet height, there's a 6 foot height, a 6 foot wide horizontal area for landscaping, and that's also there in the code today. So a lot of this is carryover, and then there's just a reference to that design criteria that I mentioned earlier in the presentation. So a lot of this is carryover. We're just clarifying this within a table format so it's easier for everyone to follow. Some other updates to the same section, just updates to 1624-1 for criteria, updates for site design, roadway placement, and consistency with the California Fire Code and city building code standards. Also, there's some minor updates for cross-lot profiles for the building envelope. We have cross-referencing also for landscaping standards at sloped areas, updates for grading techniques at hillside areas, drainage improvements, and for public safety. And we have some minor updates for site design and placement on a site. Buildings are encouraged to be placed parallel to the slope and not counter to that, which is the current guidance, so we're going to be carrying that over. There's just minor updates to the roadway placement at hillside locations and working with our engineering folks. And the building placement is encouraged to work with the terrain and not counter to it, and this is our current parameters also. So a lot of carryover there with that section. We also have some minor updates to grading techniques, which covers site situation with contour grading, landform grading, improvements, and things of that nature. Also just landscaping, again, on slopes. We have a new exceptions section here as proposed. We're providing some exceptions for, say, someone's doing a geotechnical investigation. They don't have to go get a grading permit for that. That's industry practice. Also, if they're doing flat work, 50 cubic yards or less, so putting in a walkway or something of that nature, they don't have to go get a grading permit. So that's being proposed as part of this. And lastly, I have three new sections. I'll just cover briefly here. The first one is 1624-90. This is reserved for future updates. Our second one is 1624-100, our hillside overlay map. And this will be codified within the code, so there'll be no question as far as where to find it for future staff. And then also 110 will be our prominent ridgelines maps, which also will be codified, which will help city staff and project applicants on knowing where that is. And these maps will be in our GIS on our city's website as well. So, that'll be accessible for engineers and architects and anyone involved with designing, sites. And in closing, staff recommends the following actions. Find the proposed action is consistent with the Public Resource Code sections 21,000 and section 15162 of CEQA as provided within the report. Receive and file the public comments. And then adopt a resolution recommending the council introduce and place on first reading an ordinance for Title 16 reflective of 1.3 and 1.4. And staff with engineering is also here to answer any questions and to provide further clarification on certain criteria. And that concludes my presentation. I also do have I have an email to read into the record if you'd like that now. Yeah, sure.
Gentlemen, this is a letter from Danny Long, someone we work with closely, and he wasn't able to attend tonight. So let me just read this letter on his behalf. My name is Dan Long. I live at 28640 Los Alamos Height Road in Murrieta, California. I'm also the owner of a family-owned and operated business, Heritage Hill Venues, located at the top of Western Hawback, 28701 Los Alamos Heights Road. I've been a resident of Murrieta since 1976. I also work for a local land development company in the city of Murrieta, the Rancon Group, which has been operating in this valley for 51 years. This email is not on behalf of Rancon. This email is on behalf of Dan Long, city homeowner, and local business owner, property owner. I apologize in advance of the less than thorough letter, as I was informed at 3:48 p.m. today by a family member of tonight's hearing and topic. I was at the original PC hearing on this topic in December 2022, as well as on the April 11th, 2023 community workshop. This proposed ordinance directly impacts my residents and my family-owned business. I do not support a prominent ridgeline overlay exhibit or overlay. I believe this adds an additional layer of regulation that is not needed. It has not been followed for many years, and this feels like my properties are being singled out after most of the city has been built. Why are we getting punished? Why is it suddenly an urgent matter to be preserved? Why is the city trying to preserve? Who benefits from this ordinance and overlay exhibit? If ridgelines are so special, why are we allowing buildings such as Costco, self-storage buildings, hotels, and other multi-story buildings to be built that block views of my ridgeline and other ridgelines from areas throughout the city? If views of these ridgelines are so important, why wouldn't these other developments plan to maximize views of the ridgelines? For many years, I would drive up and down 15 and 215 freeway to see my ridgeline. I beam with pride. Today, when I drive the same freeway, I only see glimpses of the ridgeline. It's not the same as it was when the city incorporated and included protection of those hillsides and ridgelines. It's time to move on. I do support guidelines that allow development to occur on the ridgelines, including a requirement of various roof lines, shallow roof pitches, and landscaping to soften and buffer structures on the ridgeline. My family owns a house at 28701 Los Alamos Heights Road that is over 4,000 square feet, 2.5 stories high. It sits on the top of a ridgeline, yet few know it exists. Why? Because of the creative design of the home and landscaping around it. This is an actual example of the actual ridgeline this ordinance is targeting. This home is an example of how good development can be accomplished with minimal impact. I am still reviewing the staff report and the proposed revisions to the ordinance. I support simplifying how structure heights are measured. As mentioned above, my family and I own a significant portion of the Western Hogbacks. This property includes a growing business and has become an asset to the community. We provide a venue for the general public to come and enjoy some of the best views in the entire valley. By overregulating what we can do in the future of this property, handcuffs our ability to grow this business. This overlay is not helping the city of Murrieta grow its business base. In summary, I do not support the prominent ridgelines map. I do support guidelines to facilitate development on ridgelines, such as shallow roof pitches, various roof lines, and landscaping to buffer and soften structures on the ridgeline. This letter is being sent on behalf of Dan Long, city homeowner, resident, and city business owner. That completes the letter.
Thank you, staff, for your presentation.
We have one other one, too.
One more letter, forget it.
Okay.
It's an email.
Sorry.
It's all good. Good afternoon, Chris. I was informed this afternoon that the Hillside Ordinance is on the PC agenda tonight. I did not receive any notification as I requested. I will try to make it, but will not have time to read the staff report thoroughly. And then we responded. My apologies, Alan. Please understand that we did send a notice to all affected properties. And additionally, moving forward in the workshop format, we'll be adding electronic transmittal for any party as well. So we did send the notices to about 1,000 people that are in that map, just for clarification there.
That concludes the letters. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, staff. Thank you, Chris, for a strong presentation, a long one. When you read the staff report and you get into the details, as I did, it takes a while, no question about it. What I'd like to do now is bring questions from the commission members to the staff. And we can start with Commissioner Varum.
Good evening. Thank you for the presentation here. I just had just a few questions here. You mentioned in your presentation around Greer Ranch and Copper Canyon. I don't know if maybe you can go back to that slide. And most of those, I'm familiar with both those developments, but what specifically with this ordinance, would it be any, how different would it be based upon what they already have standing in those development plans versus what this new ordinance provides?
So those two areas, they have their own development standards, and it's like customized zoning for those locations. They do have hillside. I did cover that in the staff report a bit, and let me go there really quick.
Yeah, meaning those two are codified. They have an existing specific plan, so these changes would not have an impact upon those because these are not adverse to their own adopted guidelines.
Yeah, basically, as referenced within Greer Ranch, development will be primarily restricted to areas less than 25% in slope, and that's on the page 1 of the specific plan. Also, when reviewing projects within Greer Ranch, On the steeper hillside areas of the plan, there are provisions for limited pad grading, landform grading techniques, and this is the same approach as provided in the city's hillside regulations. Also, they have minimal grading techniques as a standard, and stress the design and development to minimize any landscaping, or any grading. So that's kind of the background on that. They do have quite a bit of parameters within the specific plan, and that's the context for that, as well as Copper Canyon, which is also its own specific plan. As described there, the prominent ridgelines and hillside areas on site are preserved in open space. Adherence to special hillside grading techniques are required as part of this. So they also require a slope analysis for any sites as part of the planning process to identify opportunities and constraints. And they do look at 25 and 50% slopes with an emphasis on slopes less than 25% as for determining developable areas and preservation requirements. So areas of 25% or slope, as noted in the specific plan, are largely avoided. So based on that background from those two plans, the way it's set up, they're avoiding the 25% areas there by and large.
So generally speaking, I guess they're different, but they didn't really build on some of the
Right.
some of the hillsides there in, like, particularly Copper Canyon, so it didn't really apply as far as
Right.
making it more restrictive or less restrictive. And Greer Ranch, some of the same.
Some of the same, yeah. So they identified those areas when those projects were being implemented 20 years ago. They still have to comply with the city's general plan goals and policies. That applies everywhere in terms of protecting those steeper areas of the city. So even back then, I believe that was still kind of an overarching perspective. So that's kind of the background on those two.
And to help a little bit from city planner perspective, so there's a lot of residents obviously that live in those areas in Greer Ranch and Copper Canyon. They're residents with existing homes on existing graded lots. This isn't affecting them whether
Right.
we do this or not. They have their own specific plan that guides their development of their existing homes on their existing lots.
Okay, thank you for that clarification, because I know if that were to come up, that would, people might want to draw a comparison.
And we'll update the map also to pull those two areas out. So once this goes further with the ordinance, that will be clarified.
Question, because you had mentioned, and yeah, you're right, we didn't get to the workshop with the retaining walls, but the one example that you have the picture there, I think it's the one on Jackson with the condominium project, just as you come northbound into the city, and the big monolith. Yeah, there you go. So basically what you're saying is this type of a wall would not be allowed anymore. And this is kind of, as I read this the first time, in my mind, this is the wall I was thinking of, and this is the wall that, I'd love not to see built, so it's something softened.
Yeah, and it's about 18 feet at that endpoint right there near that car, the black car. It's so, as proposed at 12 feet, it would have to step back if that's at the that should be at the setback if it was being built today. So we'd have landscaping and also the use of keystone walls and other ways to soften that aesthetic. So that's that same project. They did do some keystone walls with vines. So I think if they had taken that same approach for that other side, it would have helped there. But I think that's kind of the idea there. We want to kind of soften those areas. Also, if it ever it minimizes any tagging and that sort of thing too, by having landscaping and that sort of thing too. So that's a good thing.
Right. Yeah, thank you for those changes, because I do think it definitely enhances the aesthetics, but even this wall, back to this, and the last I'll say is, even with the wrought iron on top, it gives the illusion it's even taller than what it truly is. So yeah, anything like that we can kind of soften up, and I do agree with, the graffiti, although we don't see as much as what we did before doesn't mean that it may come back, right? So I appreciate that. And then just to address maybe some of the concerns in the letter that Mr. Danny Long had sent regarding the map and the prominent ridgeline. I know you kind of mentioned it, but what's the kind of the overarching purpose of having a map versus not having a map?
Having the map identifies these locations specifically because right now it's kind of vaguely defined. This helps project applicants as well as city staff. So, you know, that's where we've kind of run into trouble before. So it's going to be, I think, used as a tool moving forward, as a helpful tool to be able to use with project review.
And then one of the other points you brought up about allowing development to occur on the ridgeline. So is what you're proposing absolutely does not allow for it, or there's mitigation factors overall of what we're trying to accomplish?
So presently there's this restriction for the narrowest part there at 50 feet high, I guess 50 feet high and 150 feet in either direction. So you have this triangle. And essentially what we're proposing for placing that with landscaping, enhanced landscaping, in lieu of that restriction to help with buffering those areas. So there's still some flexibility for those homeowners while preserving the aesthetic of those ridge lines. Because at a distance, you're not going to be able to see a whole lot up there, and especially with the landscaping, it's going to help buffer that.
And Commissioner Vrooman, we were invited by Alan Long to go out to his property, and that was a great day because we got to see, like what we were told was you could land an airplane on this thing. It's
Beautiful
long,
sight.
wide, gorgeous. And I'd just like to quote Danny, because I think we're on the same page. He says, hey, because of the creative design of the home and landscaping around it. So he takes credit for exactly what I think Chris is trying to accomplish. The ordinance is that we're not here to remove the ability for a property owner to build, but if they can do exactly what they've done in the past, which is, you know, put in some trees, you know, buffer and screen it, set it appropriately, we think we're on the same page. But I know this is a very chalky ordinance. It's a little confusing. Why do we want to come back and change it? We want to actually just put it back the way it was supposed to be originally. It was drafted incorrectly. It was implemented incorrectly. It didn't have a map. So for decades, a lot of us were like, what are we talking about? And as we've been applying this on projects, it's had an adverse impact on applicants' ability to move forward on certain projects. And that's when City Council identified, we have something wrong here. Staff, go fix it. So we're not here to penalize or negate property owners' due rights. As I see it, I think the combination of a nice landscaping and creative site design is all that we're trying to accomplish here. And I just wanted to lend that I was very appreciative to go out to the property because Chris, Carl, and I think we ingested quite a lot just being up there, which is vastly different than being on the city streets. And I walked away with saying, this is a very unique property. They have a lot of room to work with. Because when you look at it from a distance, it looks like just a little line. Mm-hmm. But when you get up there, it's beautiful. It's wide, it's healthy, it's verdant. And I think we're going to be able to accomplish these goals. But I just want to underscore that the ordinance itself, I think, is, you have to be leery of government playing with your property. I get that. But everything I've read in here is we're trying to actually give something back to the property owners that they don't actually have today, which is the way the code was written. They are restricted more than they should be. And we're just trying to put something back that they will benefit from. And again, we're here to support businesses, especially something on that hill. It's gorgeous. Why shouldn't Murrietans go up there and have a beautiful wedding or party and enjoy the beautiful serenity that we got to see? But we're here to support development, not hinder it with this ordinance.
Thank you for that clarification. With that, I have no other questions.
Commissioner Harlan, any questions?
Sure, just a couple. The retaining wall guidelines, that's new construction only, correct?
It would, well, if someone's coming in for a permit, they would be subject to it. So, you know, that would be something at the building counter if they're coming in and proposing that. Usually if you're retaining dirt, it does require a building permit. You know, it's a structural load, and maybe Rick could speak to that a little bit more. But that's my understanding.
So the picture we saw, we're not going back and asking them to change that.
Let me,
No, it's not being applied retroactively.
Right.
It's moving forward
it's
with
moving forward.
projects moving forward.
Thank you, you referenced hillside landscaping, assuming that's all subject to fire department approvals?
Correct. It's use of naturalized vegetation, fire-resistant vegetation. We have a in-house city landscaping architect that we work with. Also, we work with our fire department on those buffers. So with project review, we would establish those zones and make sure everything's consistent and safe.
Great. You referenced the website link, which I
Yes.
think looked fantastic.
Thank you.
Are you able to measure how many clicks, views, visits, participation?
I apologize. I did not. I don't know what that is.
I can help with that, Chris. I actually am more of the one in the department that handles the website. The city planner does. We don't really measure that typically. That would be something we would ask our IT folks. We don't really have access to how many clicks we get, but we share the website with interested stakeholders when they ask about it, and it's a place where we keep the latest information on the project. We do that with all of our projects.
Just be curious if, as you set that up, it obviously takes time. Certainly is probably an expectation, whether it's being met or not. The April 11th workshop, how well attended was that?
There was a few folks that showed up. We had, just a handful.
About 4.
Okay. How was that notice given? Was that mailed?
Social media. We did email. Let's see what else we did. I think we did a newspaper one too. So we did a couple different channels.
I believe it was
E-blast.
in the more Murrieta, right? It's in the e-blast, all the typical channels. We usually put the word out at the city.
Yeah, Instagram. Also the homeowners association groups too. I think we reached out to Greer Ranch and Copper Canyon back then.
We have a large email blast system that's codified by history long of communications, if you noticed.
Okay, and we had 4 people.
Yeah.
Okay. And on that point, I don't know if it's the COVID effect, but we as planners always on our projects try to get the most input from the public, whether it's virtual or in person. And we talk about ourselves. How do we get more people to think and attend? I think the people that are most invested, of course, they attend and they ask hard questions. We appreciate that. But it's hard to get the common folk out. I'll admit to that. Sometimes they'll come to a hearing, but for workshops, not sure what it is, but we see dwindling numbers. But we do whatever we can to try to augment that and get the right attention. But I would say that if it's important to people, they would attend those events.
Well, thanks, and thanks, Jared. And certainly not questioning the effort or the intent. It's to your point, how do we get more folks involved? I guess is kind of where we need to kind of lock arms. Last question, and I think it was great that you guys visited Dan Long's property. I see it from my backyard daily, and it's from my viewpoint, it looks pretty sharp. But he writes after you guys went out and visited him, and I think some of this you already talked to, but just maybe for the record, if we could talk it into. He talks about not supporting the overlay, exhibitor overlay, and he says, "This feels like my properties are being singled out after most of the city has been built. Why are we getting punished?" I think I heard you say kind of the new code supports it. The new code supports him, but if Mr. Long was here in the stands today, what would you say to him?
We have some general plan goals and policies, and I can speak directly to this. So for goal LU15, natural and visual resources are valued resources to be maintained within Los Alamos Hills. So that's in our general plan today. We have encouraged the preservation of natural and visual resources within Los Alamos Hills, such as rock outcropping, scenic views of the local hills and valleys to the greatest degree practicable. Encourage new construction landscape design that utilizes grading techniques to mimic the natural terrain. Encourage development that minimizes impacts to existing water courses, mature trees, natural features as much as possible. And those cases that these areas' features are impacted, the final design shall provide mitigation on site or in nearby areas. So there is this kind of existing policy for, projects in that area, and that's kind of where that comes from as far as the city's general plan goes.
Also, Commissioner Harlan, what I would say to Mr. Long is that what we also looked at was the ownership records of most of those properties. And most of those properties are owned by Regional Conservation Authority, which will remain an open space. So even with the limited development that Danny would present to us, if you look at the scope of the hogbacks themselves, it's not going to be a buoyant amount of development. So whatever they would like to do, we'll sit down and work with them on their landscaping and their design. But in totality, you're not going to see the evisceration of the hogbacks because most of it is privately owned by conservation authorities. For the areas that are owned by private folks like Danny, as I understand the way we're writing it, we're not restricting any development. There's going to be such limited ability to develop up there. I don't think we're going to see this giant augmentation of, structures and things that would affect the view shed. I think it's going to look similar to what it is now, where on the northerly end, you see a really nice home with a lot of vertical landscaping. It looks nice from all sides. I've looked at it from the backside. I've looked at it laterally on the site. I've looked at it from Clinton Keith. It's nice, and if we see another one on that hilltop like that, I don't think that's going to be a major issue for us as planners.
Gentlemen, I thank you for the specifics and the details.
Welcome.
Commissioner Wojcik?
Chris, thank you for that presentation. Just a couple real quick questions. In Mr. Long's letter, he mentions that the ordinance has not been followed. Is there anything to support that?
When I got here 5 years ago, one of my staff goes, "Hey, Jared, I think this is subject to the hillside ordinance." And we looked at it and we go, "Yeah, it is, the way that it's written in the code." And we said, "But that doesn't make sense. We're looking at a property in the middle of our city. Like, that's already been codified by the general plan. It has zoning, heights for 50 feet. But that's when we had an aha moment. We said, wow, this is strikingly miswritten. And I think that's unfortunately how we started off. So I can't imagine being someone that came in, got permitted for Heritage Hill, and is told years later, oops, there's a mistake. But that mistake was so heavily written into the ordinance, it was very confusing to even pull it out and recreate it. But yeah, this is difficult, I think, at best for most people, because for 32 years, what's been a big deal? But we started looking closer into the ordinance, and it's a big deal. And I'm glad we got directed by City Council, because we have to build out our city, and we have to allow property owners to exercise their ability to build out what they bought. And so again, I think this was a very poorly written ordinance in the beginning, but learning over time, I think we're just putting it back to the properties that it was originally applied to. We want to make sure that no one in the middle of our city ever gets caught up in an interpretation of the hillside ordinance, because that was very difficult. That ended up through an appeal process, and then ultimately the applicant withdrew just because of the cost of the process and all that. But yeah, I think from my direct experience, at the staff level, I'm glad we're doing this at the direction of City Council, because it's a poor mistake that was written in the code that suffered a lot of people for a long time. But yeah, that's my experience with that code. And it was god-awful sitting with those applicants and trying to tell them, yeah, I know this doesn't really apply, but it applies the way it was written, because we didn't have a map that we could easily seek at the time. We just had the verbiage in the code. And with that mathematical formula, that's all we had, was trying to interpret that information. So again, I think we're just trying to make this simple and easy for staff and applicant to review at the same time.
On the retaining walls, the second wall, you said it's going to have a step back of 6 feet from the other wall? Is that?
Yeah, in the hillside, let's see, are we talking citywide or in the hillside one?
Citywide.
Okay, I'm gonna go to that.
I think you said it was going to be a 6-foot setback from or step back from.
Yeah, at 12 feet in height, right here, at required offset. So, and this was suggested by the Development Advisory Group as a metric.
That's what I was going to ask. Is that kind of an engineering requirement? Why 6 feet? Why not 4?
6 feet's wide enough to accommodate like the roots for like a tree or, you know, it's just something larger, like, or large shrub. So, you know, there's enough root growth so that it establishes itself.
Okay. And then finally, just on the grading ordinance, correct me if I'm wrong, pools are exempt from the grading?
If it's less than, I think, 50 cubic yards, our engineer's here too. He can speak to that a little bit. I know he looks at these plans a lot, so.
And if I understand correctly, I think if you take the average pool, I think it's about 80 or 85 yards of dirt removal. So wouldn't essentially every pool require it then?
So, good afternoon, Commissioner Wojcik. So, there are a few items that are excluded when we count yardage. Pools are one of them. Building footprints, so if you had 1,000,000 yards stacked up a mile high and you put a home right on top of that, you don't count any of that yardage within the footprint of a structure as well. So in this case, the pool would also be excluded, so we don't count yardage.
But if you take more than 50 cubic yards?
No.
No,
As
so it's
long as
completely
they-
excluded. Okay.
Correct.
That's correct. Thank you.
Sure.
Clarified it. That's it.
Thanks, Rick.
Thank you, Commissioners. I have no questions myself. I've reviewed this in depth and understand it completely, and I think that the staff has done a great job. Chris, Tracy, I think you presented it well, and I don't have any questions to offer at this time for myself. So at this point in time, the applicant would make his presentation. We don't have an applicant, I don't believe, tonight.
Not tonight.
Not tonight. So we'll move on to let you know that each applicant, which would be the city at this point in time, will be limited to a 15-minute presentation, 10-minute rebuttal if requested. And we'll get to that where there's any public testimony that needs a rebuttal. Next, we'll move to open the public testimony at 6:50 p.m. Madam Secretary, do we have any public comments starting with proponents?
Thank you, Chair. We have no proponents, one opponent, and one neutral.
All right.
For opponents, we have Alan Long.
Welcome, Alan.
Thank you, Chair.
Good to see you.
Commission, good to see you and staff. I want to first just echo what Jarrett, Chris, and Carl had mentioned about the tour up at our property. I'm Dan Long's brother. It was a joy. Really enjoyed having you guys up there, and then the conversation that followed even before that, much appreciated. I think staff has done a very thorough job on this ordinance. And it says oppose. I guess I'm opposed to certain portions, just like my brother mentioned in his letter. I will say for Paul there, we will be significantly impacted. We will have a significant impact if this is approved the way it is, specifically with the map. When you take what is vague in an ordinance and you do a hard line map, I truly believe that this staff right here would work with my family in the future. However, when you have a hard line map, the staff of the future may not see it the same way. And I'll just read this to you right now, the way it defines a prominent ridge. Currently, the ridge or location that is visible from the 15, Interstate 215, or from an arterial or secondary street that forms part of the skyline and is seen as a distinct edge. Well, let me tell you something. 20 years ago, we had a lot of prominent ridge lines. And this code, this ordinance, was written and applied citywide. Read it. It's in your staff report. It was citywide. You were taking a citywide ordinance to preserve view sheds and now creating a hardline map. Because 20 years ago, we had a lot of ridge lines. Today, I would question if mine even fits in this, because I look at the back of Costco's. I had a really good presentation. I found out about this today, but I look at Rady's Children's Hospital. Off of 79, I look at two-story ridgetop homes. I don't see my ridge line anymore. 20 years ago, it's good ordinance by definition. Now you're making it more restrictive for the future by putting it in this map. There was a question regarding the scenic views. And Chris, could you repeat that section of the code where it talks about the land use goals about view sheds? And while he's looking that up, remember, didn't say one-way direction. That's reciprocal. The view sheds were reciprocal. We talked a lot about the intent of when this was written and who enforced this. The person behind this no longer lives here. She didn't want to be part of a city. She wanted to conserve everything. That was where this came from. She wanted to protect all the view sheds, both from looking at a hill ridgeline and from a ridgeline looking down. So you've got to think about that. My ridgeline, my view shed, lived here my long life.
Do you have a little bit
I have a little bit longer, and I'll wrap it up.
Thank you.
So I'm gonna really summarize, and I want to make sure that we're not so far into the weeds, both staff and the commission, that you lose sight of what you're doing. You are taking an ordinance that was supposed to be applied citywide, and now identifying a certain area of the city that, according to Jarrett, is mostly conserved already. So you're applying this ordinance only to that specific area. That's why my brother said he felt singled out. Here's something simple. Here's a very simple, easy thing to do. If all of that land is conserved, and you have our property who has a commercial business that's thriving and wants to continue to grow, that's already been developed. Every square foot of our property has been graded, filled, built upon. It's not a natural ridge line. Just move the map. You're only talking about a few property owners. I've got a commercial business. Move the map. Take me out of the hardline map. And you will have a thoroughly written ordinance that will now apply to the bunny rabbits. No one's going to oppose that. It's simple. That's what I think we would like to see. Again, I apologize. I'm not very thoroughly thought out here. I just found out about this afternoon. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Long.
For neutral comments, Dennis Hollingsworth.
Welcome, Mr. Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioners, Dennis Hollingsworth. Our family has operated a commercial wholesale tree nursery here on this property that's subject to one of the overlays since 1986 in the city of Murrieta. Obviously, it was before the city was a city. Apologize, I missed the April workshop. The notice, we were in such a rural area that I received my mail not at my street address because it was always getting stolen back then. The day I have a P.O. box, so I didn't get the notice until after that last workshop. So, Mr. Harlan, I think electronic notices and expanding, working on that, I think is a great sentiment that we can keep that going. First of all, I applaud the effort of the staff and the direction that they're going, especially the hard work Mr. Tracy has been doing on this. I think the sentiment of taking this poorly written ordinance, hard to understand, hard to implement, and making it work is very laudable. Especially, I want to say, the part when we're talking about making it more flexible in areas so that we can have housing product that is more innovative, design criteria that will utilize hillsides more effectively. Specifically, I'm talking about some of the products that Mr. Tracy showed pictures of where you have a daylight basement or a daylight garage and able to utilize existing slopes and things like that to make a nice house. That's where we're headed because our nursery is no longer going to be a nursery. We are looking at moving it to a gated community like Mr. Long, and I agree with many of the sentiments of both brothers Long, other than the fact that they have the second best views in the valley. Our property has been graded. It's been used as a commercial agricultural operation, some of it for as much as 35, 36 years. As he mentioned, the protection of prominent ridgelines was a big effort by one individual in this city when the city was being formed. We should really look at, when we move this effort forward in the form of this ordinance, we should be declaring victory on those prominent ridge lines. All of those prominent ridge lines, pretty much, other than Mr. Long's property, have been conserved. They're in public ownership. They're in a conservation agency or some other type of permanent open space. The concern I have that I share with Mr. Long is, if you look at the two largely undeveloped large properties that are subject to overlays, it's the Long family and the Hollingsworth family. Our property, for reference, in case you're not familiar with it, is the property undeveloped just south of the Greer Ranch specific plan. Now, that's not to say that that's a killer, but what I would like to have answered specifically, and Jared answered part of it when Commissioner Vrooman mentioned, is does this apply to specific plans that are existing? What I'd like to know is, can we make it clear? I couldn't find it in the limited time I had for review.
Do you have a few more minutes?
Yeah, just a minute or two. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. Would a new specific plan coming in be able to develop its own design criteria, its own land use policies within the general plan, but specific to a specific plan that would be similar to the way that existing ones like Copper Canyon and Greer Ranch are being treated? If not, then we should be looking at also specifically project by project looking at these things so that you can have some flexibility there. We did not have enough time, again, to go through this. I had both our architect that's working on our plan and our civil engineer that's working on our plan looking at this, and they were able to spot a few things pertaining to some of the things with retaining walls, things like that, that they would like to offer comment on at a later time. That's the end of my comments, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, but specifically request that we clarify the specific plan issue and have a little bit more time to fine-tune some of this before it's adopted. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hollingsworth.
Okay, this concludes public comments.
The city now has the opportunity to have a rebuttal to the points that were brought up, and we'll go forward with Mr. Tracy.
Sure. The first one is in response to Mr. Long's comments on Los Alamos Hills. So the land use policy is 15-1, and it's encouraged the preservation of natural and visual resources within Los Alamos Hills, such as rock outcroppings and scenic views of the local hills and valleys to the greatest degree practicable. So that's LU 15-1. And then to Mr. Hollingsworth's point on specific plans, they can be customized for a specific area. It's its own zoning code essentially for that area. There's analysis with the general plan so it still has to be consistent with general plan goals and policies. But outside of that, they can customize their standards, to the degree, that they see needed. That's reviewed by the Planning Commission with a recommendation to council on a specific plan type of document. Also, usually there's an EIR that would do the analysis as well, and that's one of those issue areas under a CEQA. And with Murrieta Hills more recently, we did some analysis with respect to hillside development standards, and Jared could speak to that if you have questions on that.
Yeah, Commission, so the Murrieta Hills specific plan was within the County of Riverside, subjected to their hillside ordinance. They were asking to come into our jurisdiction through an annexation and general plan amendment. So they also had to show how they were consistent with our hillside ordinance. What you'll notice in their layout is we pulled them back from all the hillsides. They're in the flatter areas and areas that are less than 25%. So we do go through an analysis with the applicant to ensure that they can place their pads. I think for Hollingsworth, a nursery, they kind of have pads ready to go in it well. So I think they can work with their CEQA and their planning consultants to submit an application that addresses that. I think because they've had grading for a nursery, I think that might be a little bit easier for them to target. I would underscore that I concur with Alan Long. I came here after working 20 years, and I came here brand new, and I discovered something with my staff that just didn't seem to be solid. And I can agree with him that I'm looking at retirement now. I'm going to be gone, and he's going to be dealing with some young planner who's like, you're done. You can't develop. And that's not what we want to accomplish. So in your recommendation to City Council, if you want to provide some thoughts or some language that can help a property owner over time, if they're subjected to the prominent ridgeline map, if we can make it more clear that that's not going to disallow development. I think I agree with that comment that time is not your friend when it comes to these interpretation issues. And I would want to make sure that 5-10 years out from now, when Danny and Alan are looking at augmenting their great business, I don't want to be in the way of that from a code perspective. I think there's always some clear language that can be offered in the code so that we survive the test of time. And I think that's a very good comment that I'm hearing from him, that I think in your recommendation to City Council, maybe that's something that you can offer some clarity for if we've missed something. So,
Thank you. Any other issues that you want to address that were brought up? How about the scenic view shed?
Yes, in the late 1970s is when a lot of hillside preservationists came out, which is, I think, is this reference to this person that used to live in the area. Everywhere I've worked, we've preserved the hills and the mountains. Some cities preserve 500 feet and up in elevation. Some preserve the tippy top of the hill, but they all have a cluttered way of how to get there. But all cities are consistent, and counties as well, is protecting the very tops of their peaks, because these were landforms that for thousands of years we looked for geographic and orientation in our areas. Hogbacks have a critical importance to tribal governments like Pechanga. It's actually called the Owl's Nest. It's the second most important feature in their culture. So there's a lot of other reasons why we'd want to protect the Santa Rosa Plateau and the top of the ridgelines, but we can still allow development, because I think we truthed out that specific plot of land. It's really a tarmac, if you will, and you can put a lot of product on there. But if there's a way that we can clarify the language so that it promotes development with buffering and screening techniques, I think that's what we're trying to align ourselves with the language in the code. But if we can perfect that through your recommendation, I'd be a big fan of that.
Yeah, and to add to Jarrett's point there, policy CSV 5.1 says promote compliance with hillside development standards and guidelines to maintain the natural character and environmental and aesthetic values of sloped areas. So that's in our general plan right now on the conservation element.
Does that satisfy your thoughts, Jarrett?
It's interesting, because if we were going to protect everyone's view shed from every corner, we'd probably have a maximum 25-foot height restriction on every property in the city. So I appreciate that things have gone vertical, and it might be harder to see things from certain vantage points, but I don't read the code to say that we're protecting your private view shed. We're protecting what happens on the ridgeline. And whether you can see that or not is immaterial. It's the fact that those property owners up there have to exercise due diligence in how they would do development. That's how I interpret this ordinance, is we're not protecting what you see on a corner, we're protecting what you can see on the ridge. So again, if that makes sense, so if we build a Costco in between you and that thing, that's not a violation of the ordinance. That's just normal general plan development and going vertical. Most of our zones allow you to go up to 50 feet in the city, and some are up to 150 feet. So I've never seen us as a city restrict heights for visual integrity of hillsides. That's not something that I've read into the record. So that's what I can offer the commission.
Are there any more comments in rebuttal to the public comments?
I think we're satisfied unless the commission has any additional questions.
All right.
Mr. Long mentioned moving the map as a potential solution. Thoughts on that?
The map has, some establishment in terms of prior reviews, and I think, we may, it may open up the environmental analysis further and get additional comments and interested parties, and we might,
Yeah, I think what I heard from that was maybe cutting out from the map, maybe not moving the map, but forgive me. What I was hearing was maybe not restricting certain property owners to that map. I think maybe that was how I heard that question posed.
And so offering from the city planner, I think Both Mr. Hollingsworth and Mr. Long and his brother could provide comments to staff. This commission's providing a recommendation to city council. This isn't the end of the project. They could provide comments to staff with their ideas and meet with Chris Tracy and talk about it with the team, and we can consider those moving forward.
I was thinking kind of the same thing of Mr. Long when you brought up, the conservation area or some other things. I mean, you have some shown and you have orange and red, but maybe some of those overlapping areas, if they could be kind of hash marked or something like that, where you say it doesn't really apply while you're trying to identify the ridge line, but I think I heard you say that a lot of it isn't really apply based upon conservation areas and things like that. So it's not really taking it out, but kind of showing that it would not apply. Does that make any sense?
I think what I'm hearing is that certain property owners do not want the prominent ridgeline map applied to their properties to get there.
I thought I heard that there was some areas within the map that couldn't be built anyways. Based upon the overlapping conservation areas or specific plans and things like that. It necessarily, while it would show on the map of what it is, it doesn't really apply because it would never be built on anyways.
Yeah, the Los Alamos area, in the eyes of the Multiple Species Habitat Conservation Program, which is run by the Regional Conservation Authority, that's what's called the Core 2 linkage. It's a pretty phenomenal linkage that draws species to the northeast from the southwest. Murrieta Creek and other areas that funnels them. That's why you see the RCA has already purchased many of those properties because it's in their core. Like they have to show how they're creating a funnel and a migratory route for avian and mammal. And they're doing a pretty good job. What we do as planners is make sure that if you're in a cell criteria area, you design to avoid certain areas to allow for that mammal and avian migration patterns. I think my point was most of the properties up in that area have already been purchased and dedicated as conservation. So there's limited development potential because there's limited legal lots. And I don't know if we had a good aerial or.
Yeah, there's some here.
But not with the conservation ones. So.
Yeah, we got, so kind of, that's kind of the northern part. So that's the southern part of the lot. That's the southern portion of the Los Alamos Hills. Los Alamos Road's on the north end there, bisecting it diagonally. And this is kind of the northern part of that same section. And then the ownership, I think we have, yeah, so here's kind of the prominent ridgeline areas. The conserved lands are in those red squares. It also now includes that larger area where the Ald Road sign is, and kind of northward from there, under recently transferred lands to the RCA, I believe. So it is true there's a lot of area there that's going to be conserved, but just for analysis with respect to the code, that's just kind of how the thought was in terms of mapping this.
Okay, thank you for that. I do agree with Mr. Long. 20 years ago, there was things have changed from where things were 20 years ago. There's different people sitting in these seats. I think Mr. Long was sitting in one of these seats back in the day on the Planning Commission. And 20 years from now, things are going to be different. There's going to be people sitting in the planning chair and different city manager, and might be a different context. But I think I wrote down a couple things that you mentioned, and maybe in the resolution, if we were to move forward, is specifically, this is not designed to prohibit development. Having that in there as part of the purpose and scope kind of tells to future.
Right, and I should emphasize what we have currently in place is more restrictive than what is proposed. So what we're actually doing is providing an opportunity with landscaping, as an option. So, the current code is more restrictive in regards to that today.
Right, but just to kind of show the purpose of, the planning commission, you know, is this is the general feeling, you know, despite the code changes and things, or the proposed code changes, this is the overall intent and purpose, or what you said, Jared, you know, not intended for the private view shed, you know, the changes for the private, you'd mentioned that. Is that something that, you know, that we would put maybe in our resolution, something along those lines that would be, no?
I think we're way off target.
Okay.
What I was trying to explain was that we don't protect your private view shed on any street corner. We don't care. You know, if you're gonna see Costco versus the Hill, sorry, that's a healthy city that's growing. What I'm saying is that we wanna be careful on what's built on the tops of those hills. And so that's, I think, what we're trying to focus on right now. But I think let's stay away from the view shed factor. I think that's just confusing a lot of information, but it's the boots on the ground. What's gonna go vertical on the top of that hill? That's what we care about, yeah. But I think clarity to make sure that no one forgets that we're trying to go from no development to well-designed development. I think that's the key here, that language.
Thank you.
I'm now going to close the public comments, public testimony at 7:15 p.m. And we'll bring it back up to the dais here for any other further questions that you may have that you haven't extended already. Mr. Vroom? Mr. Harlan? Commissioner Harlan?
I just think we need to have some kind of language to protect, like we're talking about Mr. Long and Hollingsworth, for future development. I don't know what that language looks like, but I think we should have something in there.
Yeah, I was kind of writing some notes, and probably the city attorney can assist. The language I was thinking of would be something like, at the beginning of the ordinance, would be something like, to the effect, nothing herein is intended to hinder development or in any way be inconsistent with the current aesthetics and architecture of the ridgeline. Something like that.
You can certainly add such a recommendation to your recommendation. You can approve the recommended language with an addition of words to that effect, and that'll be presented to the council with your recommendation.
I guess what I'm asking is, does that make sense?
Well, staff will make the determination of whether or not to concur with your recommendation, right? And whatever changes that you propose, but your recommendation will still ultimately go through to council as what your recommendation is. So I don't see anything unreasonable or difficult about incorporating language like you suggested, but that's something that staff will have to look at and decide how they're going to present it when they present it to council or not, whether they concur or not.
You know, nobody knows what the future is going to bring. Mr. Tracy, you're the young buck, I guess, to Jarrett's comment of retirement. I certainly won't be around. There's no question about that. But how do we protect the homeowners when we're not around? I mean, do we feel that the language is in there that needs to be in there for any future planner, director of planning? Are those people still going to be able to live the life they want to live?
Yeah, and I can read this directly from our code as proposed on prominent ridgelines. It says, in order to help address visual impacts at prominent ridgelines, use of the combination of natural occurring vegetation, trees and shrubs, and proposed landscaping shall be implemented to screen proposed structures at these locations. Additionally, any required fuel modification zone and California Fire Code standards shall be considered in the design of the screening method to blend in with the natural terrain and vegetation. That's it. So all we're talking about is landscaping.
All right. Again, we're not the deciding factor. The city council will be the deciding factor on this issue, but we want to try to scope it as best we can to deliver it to the planning committee or to the city council. And I'm sure that the homeowners or developers may have their comments at city council meeting also. But do you feel that there is a need for additional language to be added to what already exists in the in the resolution?
Yeah, I think staff is fine if you want to add some clarity, because over time, interpretations can be dangerous. And so I think it's a very prudent call by the commission. If there's some specific language that you can offer for staff, we'll hand carry that to the city council.
Okay. Any other comments? Then it's probably time that we call for a motion. And if you would state your name when you make the motion and the second, it would be helpful to our Madam Secretary. And let's make a motion. This is, where's the resolution? This is the resolution that's in front of us that you're providing us, correct?
Correct, yes.
And any additions to that, we would need to put in.
Yeah, we'll read into the record, and we're going to work with the city attorney on the final draft version as well.
You want to start with the first recommendation on the previous
Yeah,
slide?
if staff's going to read, if commissioner's going to read it.
There it
they
is.
should have it.
Okay. So whoever is making the motion, please read the first, second, and first recommendation first. And if we need to add any language, go ahead and add the language you would like to hear. Is there a motion?
I don't know if that language is really good, but I'll make an attempt.
Go ahead.
I'll make a motion
Read the
that
recommendation.
the Planning Commission find that the proposed action is consistent with the Public Resources Code, Section 21,000 et sec, the California Environmental Quality Act, pursuant to Title 14, Division 6, Chapter 3 of the California Code of Regulations, CEQA Guidelines, Section 15162, for the reasons specified in this report, with a provision that nothing in this ordinance.
I think that's going to be on recommendation 3 that you're going to want to
Three.
add.
Okay, then. And 2, receive public comments, and 3, adopt a resolution, which is attachment 1, recommending that the city council introduce and place on first reading an ordinance for the Title 16 updates reflective of attachment 1.3 and attachment 1.4, which are exhibits C and D, with additional language stating that the nothing herein in this ordinance is intended to hinder development or otherwise be inconsistent with the current aesthetics and architecture of the ridgeline or the ridgeline map.
Thank you, Commissioner Wojcik. Is there a second? And that was, the motion was made by Commissioner Wojcik. Okay.
Craig Harlan, and I'll second.
Seconded by Commissioner Harlan. Seconded by Commissioner Harlan. At this time, Madam Secretary, can we do a roll call vote with the added verbiage?
Chair Fisher,
Yes.
Vice Chair Harlan,
Aye.
Commissioner Bruman,
Aye.
Commissioner Wojcik.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We will now, Madam Secretary, we're now moving on to the workshop. And the workshop would consist of the Climate Action Plan and Housing Element Informational Workshop. Good job. Good job. No,
Do the city planner do-si-do, and I'll come down here. All right, so this is more of an informal informational item. Thought we'd give you the hard thing first, maybe the more interesting, the fun thing after. So I'm the city planner, Carl Steele, here with me tonight, Associate Planner Taylor Grable. Just wanted to do a workshop, talk about the city's existing climate action plan and our housing plan from the housing element, especially because we have, 3 of the 4 of you up there are really new commissioners. weren't a part of the actions when we adopted the climate action plan or the housing element, because we brought the housing element to the commission 2 years ago. So a lot of this is new information to you, and we wanted to give this to you to give you some more background on these items. So in the climate action plan, you really need to look at it from initially sort of what the state did. And that's what the climate action planning is kind of all based on in California. So it's all generally stems back to AB 32, which was the California Global Warming Solution Act. And that was signed by Governor Schwarzenegger in 2006. And it was a bipartisan effort at the time in the state to start addressing our emissions, really. It's really about greenhouse gas emissions. And the big goal then was to reduce or return to 1990 emission levels by 2020, which would be a 30% reduction at the time. Shockingly, we reached those levels in 2016. We reached them early. That was shocking, I would say, as a planner, having been a planner since 2006. A lot of people laughed at the time, didn't think it was going to happen. They thought things would get worse. But the state did a lot, and local jurisdictions, I would say, cities and counties. Businesses, a lot of people did a lot to make that happen. So the new AB 32 climate change scoping plan is just this last year, 2022. The state worked on that, and that target is to reduce to 40% below 1990 levels by 2030. So that's a pretty aggressive target. You're talking about dipping even lower, sort of under the bar that the state had initially looked at years ago. Ultimately, the rumblings the state's making is to achieve what they call carbon neutrality by 2045, which would be 85% below the 1990 levels by 2045. So a lot of what the state's doing, when you look at their bills to reduce emissions, they refer back to these measures. So it's good to talk about them in sort of a broad context. So what did the city do? The city has done a couple things. The city first adopted a CAP, climate action plan, we say CAP, in 2011. So that was with our comprehensive general plan update in 2011. It was tied in with the EIR. It was not what people call a qualified CAP. That means it didn't really have measures that can be implemented over time that would reduce emissions, but it had sort of aspirational goals. I would call it more of an aspirational CAP, which was kind of more of the trend at time with local jurisdictions. In 2020, when we did our focused general plan update, we did a CAP update, and we did draft it as what we would call a qualified CAP, and it's integrated in with the general plan's EIR. And it includes specific measures to reduce emissions in the city to help meet the targets. And so there's a menu of measures. We're going to talk about those kind of in a broad context tonight to help the commission sort of understand what the city's thinking on those items. I would preface that with, there are a lot of different measures that a city or a county could consider. We considered a lot of measures. We whittled it down to the ones that we'll talk about tonight, and that was through the process of the general plan update. So those are the ones we're living with now, that we're moving forward with. So it is a qualified CAP. It helps with project streamlining and potential grants. We are currently pursuing a grant to update the climate action plan with the state, and we can do that because we have a CAP, which is nice. So there's ways to pay for these things. It includes a checklist, which I'll show you on the next slide. Generally, what it means for development projects is if you're exempt from CEQA, you're exempt from the CAP. So there's a lot of what we do exempt from CEQA, so the CAP doesn't apply. If a project is subject to CEQA, but it's consistent with the general plan, then we use the checklist, which I'll show you on the next slide. If it's not consistent with the general plan, it gets more complicated, and it typically requires some kind of a GHG study, an emission study. So this is what the checklist looks like. This is real common for cities and counties that have checklists. This one was prepared by our consultant at the time on the general plan update. Essentially, it lays out the city's targets. This would be on a project that's not exempt from CEQA, so they're going to be doing a CEQA document, and we go through certain questions. I won't take you through the whole checklist because that's not really the point for tonight, but it generally refers back to some of our land use related CAP measures, and it ensures that those get implemented on a project by project basis. So this is something that we do currently. So then I kind of wanted to just walk you through the suite of measures so you have an idea of what those are. there's going to be, well, we'll talk more about it towards the end of the presentation, but there's a lot of cap measures to be implemented by staff over time. And we're just kind of starting to bring those to you. So the first suite of measures, what we would call the transportation measures. So what I give you here is the cap measure identified on the left by the number, which one it is, and we'll talk about each one a little bit to give you an idea of what they are. And then we thought it'd be interesting to kind of give you the GHG reduction metric for 2030, since we're talking about we're trying to meet targets in 2030. There's actually 3 different targets in the cap, but this is kind of the more near-term target to give you an idea of which measures are we going for more of a bang for the buck, so to speak, I guess, if you want to think of it that way in the cap, and which ones are maybe not as we're not getting as much out of them, you know, so to speak. So the first one is really the first 2. So there are the first couple cap measures, T1 and T2, are about electrical vehicle incentives and promotion, and then the electrical vehicle charging ordinance. So both of those essentially are promoting the use of electric vehicles, which reduces emissions. There's plenty of data on that. As you can see on the right, we get kind of a big bang for our buck on these. There's a lot of emission reductions. Some of that's is boating out right now with the higher EV ownership in California. For example, I think it's more than half the EVs owned in the United States are bought and sold in California every year. So there's a lot of EV ownership. We actually have a higher rate of EV ownership in Murrieta as well than other areas of Riverside County. So this is something the city considered in the Climate Action Plan, and something we thought would be a good thing to do. So, and I know recently we had one of our first measures come forward, the electrical vehicle charging ordinance. We'll talk a little bit about that, but that's kind of just one of these initial measures. A couple more in here. The TOD Affordable Housing Program, that relates into the housing element. So that's about getting more affordable in the TOD so we can get people in the areas where we have access to transportation and more in the center of the city. So that aligns closely with the housing element. It's kind of like front-loading the housing element, if you will. The bike network one, you can see we don't get a lot out of that, but that one is really just relying on the city's existing circulation element. We have a bike network, so as we build it out, we'll sort of get credit for that, essentially. Similarly, signal synchronization, our signals are already somewhat synchronized. The cap envisions sort of a little bit higher standard of maybe some more software coming out in the future that makes it even better. But right now, we already sort of get some credit for some of the synchronization that we do. For example, if you don't know, in the morning, the signals are synchronized to get people on the freeway, and in the evenings, they're synchronized to get people off the freeway. So we technically get some sort of benefit in our cap because we already do that. But there's a way to look at that, and there is a measure there to do more. Traffic calming is similar to the other techniques that we would do in the city to reduce people's speeds, things we might do in the downtown, for example, to make the downtown better. You could do some traffic calming measures, speed bumps, things like that sometimes do help reduce emissions. There's a number of different things in there. The TDM program, we have existing transportation demand management in the code. What this envisions is just sort of an update to that, especially in our areas where we might have more van pool, new businesses coming in. So that one, we do get a decent little reduction as we plan to update. So that's likely an ordinance that you'll see that'll come forward. The transit network one is really just working with RTA to make sure that we're getting some transit in the city. As opportunities come up, the city's obviously interested in more bus routes. We've lost some over time, but there's different ways about getting more transit. Another thing that some cities and counties are doing is they have almost like a on-demand transit now, where you can, it's almost like an Uber or Lyft type transit. There's areas in Orange County that have done that in recent years, where you have an app and you stand at the bus stop and you say you're there, and then the vehicle comes to you. That's kind of the future of transit. So we thought about that when we crafted this measure, in case that kind of thing comes into Riverside, we'd be interested in that. And then a big one here is the GHG reduction program. So that really talks about new development and how to do strategies to make sure emissions are reduced moving forward on big projects. And that's probably not something that's going to come forward in an ordinance. So that's kind of a big suite of them, the transportation ones. I'll talk about the building ones. We have some key ones here. So first one, community renewable energy. That's something like a CCA, or at the time we were crafting the cap, SoCal Edison was looking at some type of a green rebate renewable energy program. We put a number of different options in there. Since we drafted the cap, there's been a lot of significant progress with the CCA in northern San Diego County, if you're not familiar with it. Almost all of the cities in northern San Diego County have now joined up with that. And SDG&E has announced recently themselves that they're getting out of the energy production business and they're just going to be in the energy delivery business. And they're relying on the CCA essentially to contract all of the energy production in northern San Diego County. This measure kind of envisions a similar item coming here. The idea there is to give people choice. We crafted the measure to not be a mandate. We crafted it to be an option. But what's kind of happening, what we're seeing happen with some of the local ones, is when it gets implemented, it tends to be better than the existing monopoly utility, and they tend to do a better job, and then people get reduced rates. Not all the time, but it's an interesting item. It's likely to be a controversial item. I can't mince words there. It'll probably be pretty controversial, but it was one that we put in there and the council supported. The municipal renewable energy one's like about the city putting solar panels on the roof, essentially, of city buildings. Another one that's important that you will likely see on the commission in the next few years would be a net zero energy standard, or zero net energy standard. What that would entail is the state is working towards this anyway in the Green Building Code. It's essentially more efficient windows in homes, solar panels on homes, more like energy, electrical upgrades in homes so that the home is self-sufficient itself and doesn't need to be necessarily powered by the grid. It can be connected to the grid, but the idea being that as homes are built and eventually businesses are built, that they produce their own energy and they don't necessarily need to draw on the grid sort of at normal operating capacity. This one is one that the Green Building Code keeps working more and more towards in discussions with our building official this year, the new updates that came out in January. It's looking like the state's getting closer and closer to sort of pushing this through anyway. What the city would do with this would be probably try to ramp up and implement it sooner, but the state's pushing towards the standard anyway. And then the energy efficiency and electrification program is another one that kind of gets a pretty big bang. On that one we would align closely with WRCOG. They have a partnership developed to implement like a comprehensive electrification and energy retrofit program. And that's kind of like letting people switch to electricity if they want to. The city wouldn't go out there and force people to do it, but if people want to do it, that's an option for us to help reduce emissions. So that's kind of the building energy ones. Got a couple more here and then we can stop for discussion. So the jobs housing balance strategy and the land use, that's really like our land use 101. That's what we did with the general plan update, putting people and the innovation zone closer together so we get jobs and people in the same place. That's kind of taking advantage of that, and that was intricate with the focused update. The tree planting program aligns with our tree ordinance. It's about getting more trees planted in the city. We've actually been doing a great job of that. We align closely with our community services department on that, especially with Leah and Brian in the department. We get credit for the trees we plant. Essentially keep track of more and more trees. The more trees we plant, the better off we are on this. And then the open space conservation one, I would say, is also going really well. It's essentially about, we had a pretty conservative low target, and we're doing really well in big part thanks to Murrieta Hills. We're getting hundreds of acres of open space out there, which is way above the target we thought we would get. The idea with this measure is just to keep getting more open space in the city where we can, and as we preserve that land, then we know it's not going to have uses coming in that are creating emissions. And then the last kind of suite are, I would say, not as important items as some of the other ones, but sort of existing ones that we do. Solid waste one and the construction waste diversion program are both kind of about dealing with waste, especially related to construction and existing uses within the city. There's some Cal Green targets that are already in the building code that we can kind of point to there that help us get reductions there. One of the issues there has been not having as many places in Riverside to recycle or to reuse waste that some of the other counties have, and I know that's been a complaint that a number of cities have had, and something we're looking forward, moving forward, is we might get more options in Riverside as we have more development. So there may be some more opportunities there, but these measures essentially relate to that. And then the final two, you can see, are really low on the reduction measure, but we do have our own landscaping and water conservation that we do, and we allow for rainwater catchment and gray water systems. We get a very small little trickle out of that. So with that, that's kind of a general, quick overview. I don't know how long I took on the cap. Open it up for commission discussion or comments. Then I'll grab my water in a second.
Do we have any questions from the commission?
You know, just generally speaking, I know the report's already 7 years old. I think when the process started back in 2009, so now 2016 was the first update. Is there any plans maybe or thoughts of maybe having a newer one updated? Only one of the things I noticed in there, like some of the population projections at the time, and we look at the census from a couple of years ago, well, 3 years ago now, and where our actual population figures, and of course that just triggers everything all down the line of what the gap is. It's all based upon population. So is there any thought about updating that?
Yes, Commissioner Ruman. So the grant that we've currently applied for is it's with the Governor's Office of Planning and Research, which is in Sacramento. They offer funding to cities that have caps to update their caps. We have a grant application in currently, hoping to, and Taylor, I gotta give Taylor credit. He did a good job helping us get that in. We're hoping to hear back on that in the next month. I think it's in August. So if we get that, that's good news. The cities, our department is looking at doing a climate, we would call it a general plan cleanup, and that would entail looking at the cap and updating the cap. Our numbers, you're correct, Commissioner Ruman, the numbers in the cap are from like 2019, so they're already 4 years old, and then it was adopted in 2020. Caps are only as good as like the day they're adopted, essentially, on some of those numbers. So they do get outdated within a few years. So staff is aware that it's something we could update. But I would say overall, regarding the measures, I think we're still looking at the same suite of measures that we think would give us the emission reductions that we want to see.
Yeah, because I think they had 2020, I think the population of 115,000, and I think Department of Finance, where we derive our population, I think we're floating around 110 for the last couple of years. Just a question on the, you know, of course, one of the things was it was 76% here on the on-road transportation. How is that calculated, or where do we base that from? Is that based on how many vehicles are registered in Murrieta, maybe what types, how old, you know, to come up with that calculation of
Is it on the EV measure?
Yes.
Yeah, on the EV measures. I think at the time it was based on, right, they can pull the data of like vehicles registered in the city, what types of vehicles we have registered in the city.
So that's what that's tied to, as opposed to, there's a lot of people that drive the freeways, right, that pass through our jurisdiction. And is there any sense of overlap, you know, because as we pull our cap numbers, you know, Temecula's next door, Wildemar, Menifee, is there any sense of overlap to where we're almost kind of double counting in some respects? Or is it pure to actual properties or vehicles or population?
It's kind of both. So, which is, I know it sounds weird. It does, so the measures, especially the first measure, the T1 measure, it does account for like the efforts by the state to electrify vehicles. And that includes, for example, I don't know if you've seen, I was excited when I saw recently in the last few months, you know, FedEx has electric trucks out there now, Amazon has electric trucks out there. I would say, honestly, that was not something we were looking at 4 years ago in this cap. So that's exciting to see. That's reducing emissions. Those vehicles may not always be based in the city, but they might spend their whole day in the city. So this does kind of account for that. The pass-through on the freeway, that's not quite the same kind of discussion. It's more about like the vehicles that are in the city and that spend time in the city and are involved with the business in the city and the uses in the city. It's more like that.
And since the adoption, we had COVID, and that
Right.
dramatically changed emission factors. We saw all around the planet, emissions were lowered, but as soon as the economic engine revved up, now we're gonna see them return to normal levels. But I think what we can see is permanent changes, live, work, remote. Certainly our staff, we're changing. In the next couple of months, we're gonna have a program where more of us can work a little bit more remote, and that's to lower emissions. I mean, I'm really excited about that because that's gonna become measurable at the staff and resident and business level. But I think the new numbers, that's what we're gonna work on and see what does that tell us? Are we facing a situation where there are lower emissions because people aren't driving to San Diego, driving to Orange County? That's something that we'd like to see in the metrics that we develop.
And I think all the more reason why maybe a new study might be in order because, commute patterns and things like that have changed since that period of time. So maybe that local gap would be shrunk a little bit, as well as maybe a more updated population. And so then the impetus to, hey, we need to do this because we're this far apart, really that local gap might shrink to some degree.
And also smart land use, because we brought in a tentative track map recently, the 8 lot, and we showed you how back in 2019, staff like Carl worked with Planning Commission and City Council to convert Office Research Park to innovation, multifamily, and single family. Now we actually have walkable trips. So I'm really excited to see how we've, I think, shored up that distance criteria. We're putting innovation land uses where companies that have employees, like 10 to 50 a number, could actually live in the same general area. Not all of them, but we're seeing a lot of people, because of COVID, they're attracted to that type of arrangement. No one wants to sit in their car 1 to 2 hours anymore. I think we heard that back from a lot of employees across the country, but we'll see how much that sticks. Is that gonna be a permanent endeavor, or is it more of a lifestyle choice? But I think we're gonna see some positive numbers, but that's what we'll see what we can do with the next round.
And I would also add, the state also has come up with the EV targets that didn't exist 4 years ago, the governor's new targets to end the sale of gas vehicles. Who knows if that actually goes through when we get there, but there's new targets there that didn't exist when we drafted this up.
So one other question when it comes to conversion, like homes to solar panels or to having battery backup systems and things like that. I know Southern California Edison and the gas company have incentive programs, and of course those are, when they do that, then ultimately they have to file a permit with the city. So the city has the information of those conversions and things like that. Do we get any type of quote unquote credit for that, or are we tracking that, and does that figure into this report? It's not in the report, but is it something that number one, we could advertise those incentive programs and point them to that direction, but then also get some type of credit to reduce that gap?
We can. I think it's more about the city would need to reach out to SoCal Edison and Gas and really set up more of a program where the city's helping to promote, and that's one of the measures kind of gets into that. There's a certain amount of those that happen anyway that there's sort of like a baseline that the cap looks at. It's similar to like CEQA. There's like a baseline impact level. There's not like a void of nothing happening. There's the folks who draft the climate action plan have like sort of a baseline level, and they're trying to push you to do what can you do to get more, right? So yeah, it would be more about the city would need to craft a program to help do more of them than maybe just the normal ones we do on a daily basis or weekly basis, if it will.
And Commissioner Vrooman, the Congress passed last year in their budget the green economy or something like that. But what that meant was if you put solar in a battery, you get 30% back after your taxes. Also CARB, if you buy an EV at their website, if it qualifies, they'll give you up to $7,500 as a rebate. So there's a lot of incentives out there by the state and federal government so that if you are interested in those programs, there's a lot of actual relief that's on the way, especially with your local energy company. There's some small little incentive programs that they have. So I think there's a bounty of options for folks, especially in California. I think we drive the world, if you will, like Carl said, with EV purchasing and an appetite, for this type of technology.
But I think to push it in the cap to get credit, we would want to have a city sort of program where the city's really pushing it and getting more people to do it, and then we would track it that way.
And that's where I'm going with it. I'll just tell you from practical experience, and what's unique to Murrieta is that we have Southern California Edison declared fire zones in the city. And so the fact that if you live in that city, and pretty much the vast majority of Copper Canyon and other parts of the city sit within those fire zones. So for those homeowners that live in that area, you become eligible for the Southern California Edison and or gas. You know, there's a funding source. Well, they'll pay for, oh gosh, probably 80% or more, or up to that. And then, of course, with tax incentives and things like that that you get when you file your taxes. But to have the city promote something like that as a nexus to the homeowners in those particular areas to put them in touch with them, apply for it. It's a grant type of thing like that. But where I'm going with that is we have all that information based upon the permits that have to be ultimately filed with the city because of the construction, right? And so we have that information to track it. So could we use that data and that information to somehow lower our footprint really and you know, reduce that number?
I think we could. I can tell you, yes. So I think the answer is yes on that. I think we could. Based on the discussions that I remember, it's been a few years, but with the consultant, we do kind of get more of a bang for our buck with the new development though, moving forward. The things that are coming through right now, especially considering, as the commission knows, the multifamily, that we have a plethora of multifamily. If we can make that multifamily really efficient as it comes into the city, we're better off, because it's a big draw. If you think about lots of multifamily coming in that's inefficient. So it'd be more about that, and there's kind of like a lot of the homes that we have in the city are just kind of in existing condition. But the retrofit program, you do get some benefit from it over time. I would say in discussions at the time with council and commission, I remember 4 years ago, everybody said it was kind of like, yeah, we don't want to mandate this, but if we give people the option, will people, you know, the city's supportive of it. So I think, yes, that's kind of the idea.
Yeah, and a lot of these programs have only come about in the last 2 to 3 years after the study was done. So I imagine it could be more impactful than what we might know at this point in time. Just a thought, observation. That's it for me.
Thank you, Commissioner Verum. Commissioner Arlen?
Now, the nice thing about batteries, I got those a couple of years ago, is being in a fire zone, if suddenly they throw your power out, you just keep plugging right along. So it's a nice benefit. Just two quick things. Being a walker of dogs out and about during the school season, there's a lot of school buses out there. If we could get those things flipped over to electric.
Yes, not to be rude, the school district is looking at electrifying the buses, and that was part of what Taylor and I worked on with the CAP proposal.
Okay, then so I saw this in 2013 when I lived up in Seattle. They, for $5, and this was a private thing, and you know, this could be public, could be private, but for $5, they would run a bus up and down from Seattle to Portland along that 5 freeway. And you think about here, Murrieta, you know, we talk Wildomar, Lake Elsinore, down to Temecula, Escondido, Poway, San Marcos. If there was some, you know, now with Uber and Lyft and all those things, well, you could take a lot of folks potentially off the road and coming up over the 15 there, especially in the afternoon, to be sitting in a bus and doing your email or catching up on stuff versus just sitting in that parking lot. You know, again, I don't know if that's a private or public venture, but that could be an opportunity knocking for somebody to maybe put something together, and that could take a lot of vehicles off the road and be a quality of life improvement for a lot of folks that do have to commute.
Yeah,
that's all I had.
Yeah, so Commissioner Harlan, that would align with T8, the transit network one, and working with RTA to electrify their network. That would totally align with the CAP.
Commissioner Wojcik?
Yeah, first off, congratulations to everybody sitting out there. Everybody got the wear a blue shirt, collared shirt to work memo today, except one person, so. The synchronization of the traffic signals, we have some state highways. Are all those lights for all the off-ramps, on-ramps, Highway 79, are we synchronized with all those, or are we still trying to work with those agencies?
So I don't have the traffic engineer with me here tonight, but I can read the measure to you. The measure assumes the city would conduct a comprehensive upgrade of the traffic signal system to improve traffic flow and traffic congestion, particularly during commute congestion periods. And we do have control of the lights at the freeway ramps, I know that.
Okay.
So it would be a bit, like I was kind of alluding to before, it'd be a bit more of a deeper dive. And I've talked about it with the city engineer, and it is something we're looking at. When it's kind of like the software isn't quite there yet. We've looked, there's some vendors, there's some options. It's not quite where we would want it yet, but when we can get it, the city will be interested in doing that and making the lights smarter, so that we could maybe react quicker when there's traffic problems, and that will really improve the traffic flow. It's kind of a win-win. It's like it improves traffic flow, reduces emissions. People like it because maybe they get out of a situation where they're being stuck somewhere. So yeah, the city's really interested in it, and it does give us some reduction.
Commissioner, I heard recently from Council Member Ron Holliday that he met with some of the Caltrans folks. There's been complaints about how they meter their lights, and I think there's going to be some fluidity between the city and Caltrans, because I think that's been a long-term issue. When you try across Murrieta Hot Springs Road at Winchester, Clinton Keith at 215, there's certain areas where, although we have adaptive signal and timing on the other sides, we could appreciate some better flow from them. So I know one of our council members, because he sits on the RCTC board, this was brought to his attention, so he's being very proactive to see if we can get some additional help. But like Carl says, the rest of the program, this could really function well with automated synchronization. We already have that program, but if we had it robust and was mapped wide, that would allow our traffic engineers to really run this city pretty well. I think that would be wonderful to have that attribute.
I have nothing further. Thank you, guys.
Commissioner Wojciech took my thunder.
Oh.
But anyhow, I always was under the impression that in the synchronization of signals, that we had a partnership, or we were at the mercy of Caltrans to be able to regulate the on and off ramps of the city. And that's the impression I was under, but that is not true, that we actually can control the on ramps and off ramps to the freeways?
Well, there's a jurisdictional boundary where Caltrans has authority and we don't. But like I said, our council member had a recent meeting, which I just don't think anybody ever called Caltrans for that meeting, and he did. And he got a really good reception, and they said, why can't we work together? So if there have been some nuanced issues, I think Murrieta is the type of city to step up and try to get some partnerships. And that's what I heard loud and clear at a public hearing recently from Councilmember Holliday.
But I can confirm the lights, I've discussed this with the traffic engineer, the general comment I had is true. They're aligned to get people on the freeway in the morning and get people off in the evening. But, right, the city might want more out of that than just that, right? So, but that's generally the approach that we have with the lights currently.
Yeah, I saw Councilman's presentation on that at one of the council meetings. Madam Secretary, are there any public comments?
Thank you, Chair. We do not have public comments.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Okay.
So I would move on to the next part, if that's okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
Because I kind of paused in the middle.
All right, go
Sorry.
ahead.
I don't want it to be too long of a night, but I did want to kind of jump onto the housing stuff, if that's okay.
Okay.
All right. So, the housing plan. What's in the housing plan? So in general, we did a housing element update. Like I said, we took it to commission a couple of years ago. It's been a while. Commissioner Fisher might remember, but the other folks, this is new to you. Essentially, the housing element is for the years 2021 to 2029. So we're already in the cycle. It includes an introduction, community profile, housing constraints, resources, and what we call our fair housing analysis. Essentially, the first three sections is a whole lot of data about the city. But the housing plan is where we say what we're going to do moving forward, and we're already in the cycle. So it includes goals, policies, and policy actions. So we'll talk about section 4 of the housing plan. So it's our policy program for housing. It describes specific policies and programs to assist us, city decision makers, yourselves included, and the city council, on achieving our housing goals. We have new and updated policies, and you have to think about this. The state's done a lot since the previous cycle, as I think the Commission's aware of. The previous cycle, we were working on the housing element back in 2012, 2013 era. So we got 10 years of state laws since then that have really messed with housing. So there was a lot to do. I would say our overall goal is to encourage a diverse, sustainable, balanced community by implementing strategies and programs that support, preserve, and enhance the special character of Murrieta, and that's in our housing plan. So what are the overall goals and policies, just to get the Commission up to speed? So the first kind of section talks about adequate housing opportunities throughout the city. And really what that's about, from the state's perspective, and we work with HCD on the housing plan, providing different types of housing in the city. So first policy, providing a range of different types. That can be different types of ownership, that can be different types of units. They want us to encourage development of affordable housing throughout the city and not just put it all in one place. And they want us to have incentives to help get that done. They want us to have policies for senior and low-income housing, encourage development of housing types that accommodate all different types of households, and then allow for lot consolidation. This came up especially when we discussed with the state about our downtown and how to kind of help housing get built there, and then specifically affordable housing. So this is kind of the first suite of policies that are in the housing plan, and it's really all about opportunity. So I guess my comment to the Commission would be, oftentimes this comes about in flexibility in the code, and the way the state looks at our code, they say, where are you providing flexibility? If you're not, they kind of point to the areas where they think we're not. So these are the policies we crafted with working with HCD, and these are the policies that Council has adopted with our housing element. So number two, conserve and enhance the quality of existing housing in residential neighborhoods. So this kind of gets to the existing stock that's out there. The state has a lot of concerns about not wanting areas of the state to degrade. They want to keep housing up. Our city is a relatively young city, so some of these policies don't necessarily ring as true for example, if you were in a Long Beach or an older city, but you still have to have these kind of policies. So we want to promote revitalization, rehabilitation, if we can, assist in the preservations of at-risk from converting. So that would be, for example, if we had affordable housing in the city that was maybe 50 years old and getting close to being the end of the life cycle of like an affordable housing sort of restriction. We don't have units like that. Most of our affordable units in the city are less than 20 years old, so it doesn't really apply, but we have a policy for it. Encouraging promotion of energy efficient design. This kind of connects with the CAP. So we have a CAP policy that's very similar, so we kind of align those together. Encouraging property owners to maintain and make improvements to their properties. This kind of gets to, I think, something the Commission appreciates, people preserving their properties, maintaining their properties, right? We want to encourage that. So the city wants to help encourage that, so does the county. And then another one that kind of aligns with the CAP, policy 2.5, is how do we do mixed use, how do we do transit, bicycle, pedestrian-oriented developments that help, because we know that doing those types of developments helps with our community health. So it aligns with other elements in our general plan as well. So the third one, we're going through 5 here. The third one is to minimize the impact of government constraints on housing production and affordability. This one I know can be somewhat of a hard pill to swallow, but again, it's kind of like the HCD sort of in the discussions over the last 2 years, we've been working on the housing element with them. They kind of want cities to start looking at themselves and saying, where are you holding up development, in a way is what they say. When do you hear from developers that hey, why do you have that standard in there? I can't do the project I want to do, right? They want us to keep track of that and then look at our code over time, essentially. So the first one, increase opportunities for developer incentives, such as the density bonus program, flexibility in development standards, facilitate the development of quality housing for for affordable housing. We do allow density bonus. We've been doing a lot of density bonus projects, I think, as the Commission knows, so we've been kind of successful with that so far. They want us to periodically review and revise the city's development standards if necessary to facilitate quality housing that's affordable to all income levels. We've agreed to that. It makes sense. We do that anyway. As Chris Tracy, our great senior planner does sort of like our annual updates with the code, so it's something we look at. Policy 3.3 is when feasible, consider reducing, subsidizing, or deferring development fees, offer faster permitting for projects. We're considering that on a few projects right now, something that we can do to help move those projects along. It's really hard to finance affordable housing. And then support innovative public, private, nonprofit partnership efforts for affordable housing. We've done that. The city's done that with the Adams Avenue Affordable Project. City owns the property. We're partnering with National Corps, so we're kind of banging out some of these already. Encourage the development of rental units with 3 or more bedrooms to provide housing for large families. This is just something that's come out of our demographics. It was in our previous housing element. We have trouble getting especially rental units with more than 3 bedrooms. It just seems like a lot of the product type that the developers come in and build around here is only like 2 or 3 bedrooms. We don't get a lot of the bigger units, and we have families that need larger units. So it's something that we look to encourage. So the fourth one, equal opportunity for all residents, and this kind of gets into a lot of the fair housing. I would say this one is a big one that's kind of new, and there's a lot of new policies here. The state passed the fair housing law, what we call affirmatively furthering fair housing, AFFH. The state's really pushing this from the lens and the standpoint of, and not to say that our city's done this, but there are cities out there who've kind of only put affordable housing in certain areas of the city, maybe put people in areas where they have higher crime, and not allowed people to build affordable housing in areas where there's less crime, things like that, and discriminated based on different other potential options. So this is something the state's really looked hard at in recent years with state laws. So we have a policy. The first one is just generally preventing discrimination in all its types. Second one, cooperating with fair housing. We do that already. We're going to continue to do that. Taylor will be doing workshops with fair housing as we move forward over time. That's to help people that run into housing issues. The third one, provide adequate information on fair housing laws. So the city will be doing more outreach and engagement through those workshops. So we have goals to do that. So you'll be hearing about those. Those won't be coming before you, but you'll be hearing about those things. And then assessing the social service needs of the community with a wide variety of service programs. The fourth one, it really relates back to things that we already do. For example, CDBG funding that the city council does to social service programs. We kind of get, if you will, get credit for that under this one. And there's more that the city can do there, but that's generally kind of the approach there. And the last one is kind of an easy one to wrap up. So policy 5.1, we do our sites analysis. We need to promote our sites analysis. So something a lot of cities did in the past, cities kind of crafted their housing element, they throw it on a shelf and they don't talk about it, right? So that's not what the state wants to see now. The state wants to see us sort of, we did our analysis, where are our sites, let people know where the sites are. Hey, these are the sites we want people to build affordable housing. That's why we did all that work, right? So both of these policies kind of get into that, like, did we plan enough for it? Yes, we did. And do we have a sites inventory? Yes, we do. So the city will provide that information up on the website, and that's something we'll work on moving forward. So I wanted to tie this back to the EV and housing implementation ordinance that came to you a couple weeks back. So essentially what we're trying to do with that ordinance, and this workshop kind of helps us lay it out for you, we're trying to start getting some of these items implemented. And so this came about through a grant. So the city didn't even pay for this ordinance to be prepared. It came about a grant through WRCOG, which a lot of cities didn't jump at, but our city did. And thanks to Jared's leadership, we got them to essentially pay for drafting an ordinance. And then Taylor here, who's also being funded by a grant that we got, is bringing it forward. So the first one, the EV charging parking requirements, that's implementing that straight up, that cap measure T2, which is kicking off kind of our EV program. That's the whole idea behind that. I would, to boil it down for you, it's essentially the green building code right now is requiring people to put the plumbing in to put an EV charger in their garage, but it's not going far enough yet to tell people they need to put in a charger when they build a unit. Our cap measure essentially just says we want people to put the charger in. So we have a minimum level of charger, We talked about that with our building official. We're trying to be flexible there. We're not trying to tell people where to put the charger. We're not trying to tell people they have to put a higher level charger. We're just trying to make sure we get the sort of the bare minimum, and that helps with implementing of EVs, right? If every time people are building new units in Murrieta, they move in and they've got an EV charger in their garage, it will likely lead to more people buying EVs. It's just kind of like, it's that simple. So that's essentially what that measure is trying to do. The other ones are all housing-related measures, I think, as the commission knows. So those really kind of get back to that. It's sort of a balance between the first housing goal, which is, are we providing housing opportunities and flexibility sort of out there? And then the third one, are we minimizing the impacts of government constraints? And we hear from developers on some of these items, so I'll talk about those. So the first one, the multifamily minimum lot size issue. On that one, sort of from a broad perspective, that was something that HCD caught right away in their review 2 years ago, and they said, why do you have a 5-acre minimum lot size for multifamily? We really didn't have a good answer. It's been in the code for a long time. If you look at other jurisdictions in our area, nobody has a lot size of over 1 acre for multifamily development. Everybody's lot sizes are smaller. Some go down to as small as 1/4 of an acre. That's typically to provide flexibility. That doesn't necessarily mean that every project that people build is going to do a subdivision. It's really about providing flexibility in the code. One way that might provide flexibility, for example, is if a developer wanted to build 2 different product types and wants to have them on 2 different parcels, for example, condo product and apartment product. They want to have them 2 different parcels, fund them separately. They might want to do a subdivision to split them off. Requiring a 5-acre minimum lot size means someone needs to have 10 acres to split it into 2 5-acre parcels. That's not providing a lot of flexibility. So that was kind of easy fodder, I think, for the state to find that. So we've agreed to change that. That's in our policy action item. I think the reasonable accommodation one is relatively simple, so I'll kind of gloss over that. It's essentially just about providing sort of a fair variety of housing types and also periodically looking at our code. Our code wasn't quite up to date on that. It's a relatively easy fix. The manufactured homes in all residential zones, essentially what that is, the state's looking at it saying, why does it matter if people want to do a manufactured home in one of your residential zones versus another? They're doing this to all the jurisdictions in the state, I would tell you. So we're not being singled out. Everybody's getting the same comment. The state wants to see the ability for people to do manufactured homes everywhere. There's different types of manufactured homes. I'd say if the commission's concerned about that one, it's more about design of those and having like objective standards in our code that says, hey, we want manufactured homes to look a certain way. And that's something that staff can look at moving forward. But on this item, there's really not a good position for us to say, no, we don't want manufactured homes in certain zones. We want them in other zones. It's just, there's no flexibility there from a policy standpoint. Similarly, the garage requirement. So that one really comes about from 2 angles. One is we have developers who come in the city that want to build a multifamily project and they don't want to build garages. I would say most of the developers we have do want to build multifamily with garages, but there are some that come in that don't want to do it. It also comes about because the state has this idea that garages being built with multifamily means you're losing potential space for units. So from the state standpoint, they're looking at it like, are we getting as many units as we can possibly get in certain areas? And I know that can be alarming as a commissioner, but that's sort of where their lens is coming from. So we've got kind of 2 factions there. You got developers saying, I don't want to build garages. And you got the state saying, you're requiring people to build garages, and you're not getting units. So they're doing this to all the cities in this cycle. And our consultants did housing elements for other cities. They said everybody got this comment if they had garages required in there. So we've agreed to it. It's in our policy action to remove the garage requirement. That does not mean that we're not going to have garages with multifamily development. We will have developers that will come in that will build them. We're just not going to require it as a mandate every time on every project, essentially. That's what the item is. The conditional use permit findings, what that gets into is the objective standards sort of standpoint. It kind of ties into what we're doing with the multifamily standards. The state's trying to remove subjectivity from conditional use permit findings related to residential uses. There was a little bit of a goof on that we did as staff. We apologize. we just needed to clarify that that's just to residential uses, and we'll do that when we bring the ordinance back. And then the final one, essentially, the state's looking around as well at emergency shelters. We don't have one in the city, so I don't know that it's a huge concern, but there were cities out there that were requiring like exorbitant parking standards for emergency shelters as a way to make sure that they only occurred in certain areas. So like, for example, a city out there might say every employee that works at the shelter and every person that comes there needs a parking spot, and then that makes it difficult for an emergency shelter to go somewhere. The state said no. In our discussions, when we talked about it, they said, you can't require any more than you would require for a similar use in whatever zone the emergency shelter is proposed in. So that's the way we've crafted the standard. So essentially, we would look around and see what the other uses are wherever it's proposed and try to align the parking with a similar amount. But we don't have an emergency shelter proposed in the city. There's not one proposed. But we do have it's required that we have the ability for emergency shelters. That's from previous state law. And so we have to have a parking standard for it. This is kind of like low-hanging fruit for HCD to just look at that and say, well, fix your parking standard. And we agreed to do that. So that kind of gives you the context, maybe helpful, I hope, from the CAP discussion, the housing element discussion. It's a bit more long-winded than Taylor probably had time for. And I would open it up to the commission if you guys had further discussion on that.
Any comments from the commission? Mr. Vroom?
Just two. You mentioned about the manufactured homes and the design standards. By moving forward with this, would this create a whole nother, do you have sufficient codes in place to deal with that? Or would you need to now kind of look at that and adopt more codes in order to now address manufactured homes in certain areas?
I think we do. So I would comment that the intent of, so we're still kind of in the position where we're bringing you back the multifamily objective standards. Right. The city's adopted them as an urgency ordinance. But I think we do. I think people that propose homes within the multifamily zone are going to have to comply with the objective standards. So I think we're okay there. So I would allay some of the commission's concerns. And then manufactured homes are already allowed in the single family zones. We have current standards in the code that require, for example, when people use a manufactured home as a second dwelling unit or accessory dwelling unit, they usually have to match the house. So we make them match the roofing material and the siding. So we already do that. So there could be some clarification staff could make over time there, but I'm not overly concerned that this is going to mean that we're going to end up with a plethora of people doing multifamily manufactured homes in multifamily. I would also offer multifamily properties are expensive, and we don't really see developers putting manufactured homes in multifamily. With the amount of capital the developers come in looking to do multifamily, they want to build something they're going to make their return on, not throw manufactured homes out there, in our experience. I think we've experienced that in our careers. I've never seen somebody do a manufactured home on a multifamily site.
Yeah, I just was looking to see, make sure the city, you had enough tools in your toolbox, if you will, if now we have to do this, if there's some other codes that would probably need to be put in place, but it sounds like you have the foundation to. I
think we do, and I think Commissioner Vrooman, moving forward, if this became an issue, we can quickly address it. I think with the code update.
And then the only other clarification, of course, in where I bring up the garages in the multifamily, and again, putting my law enforcement hat on, it is obviously, cars are less to be broken into or stolen in a garage versus a carport or whatnot. And one of the things we pride ourselves here in Murrieta is obviously low crime statistics, and and those type of crimes are used for our crime stats, right? Auto theft and car burglaries, those type of things like that. So is there some other type of, if we're kind of obligated to remove that requirement, is there some other type of incentives, if you will, that would still, I'm probably more for like condominiums and things like that. Apartments, I think a lot of people don't really necessarily expect a garage in an apartment complex, although the luxury ones do. That's how they market that way, right? But when you buy a condominium, you kind of almost expect that it comes with a garage, right? And to not have one would be kind of odd. But is there something that you can do to kind of maybe incentivize that, you know, whether design or something, hey, garage goes on the first floor, you know, dwelling units, you know, or the living spaces above it, or something along that to kind of still keeping the intent of the, you know, crime prevention through environmental design concept, even though we can't require it, but somehow incentivize or steer it that way if we could.
Maybe that's something we can look at, like moving forward as part of other items, but as far as this item goes, it's not,
right.
That's not really what would relate to this, when we bring this back to you. It's really more just about removing that requirement.
I know, I just hate to lose ground, right, you know?
Yeah. I understand, you know, honestly, when we first, I think I have a few more gray hairs from the last 2 years with HCD. When we first got going on the housing element, I would say, you know, it's kind of like, I guess, a college student when you first get to college and the world's your oyster, and then maybe a few years later, you're a little bit beaten down, and you just give me my degree and let me leave. So I'd say it's similar. Like we were gung ho to hold the line on some things. I'd be honest with you, and it was just a losing battle with HCD. These are things we have to do.
Yeah, I'm just kind of wondering, you mentioned some little caveat there about, you know, charging stations and garages and things like that. Maybe that's the incentive to put a garage because you get a charging station inside of it. You know, it's kind of one of those little benefit type of things like that. Hey, we'll let you do this if you know, to kind of go that direction, you know what I mean?
That's creative. I think it's possible that we could put things in the code moving forward. We'd have to think about that as a separate process where we could encourage people to do garages.
Because they get a charging station.
I got
you know what you mean?
We could look at it that way. I think that's a separate process we'd have to think about.
Yeah, it's interesting. We recently received a pre-application to discuss a multifamily project at a density of 30 or higher, but they're going to do a wrap project. And the first floor is basically all of the vehicles in a large garage with roll-up doors.
Huh.
And so they're hearing you out. I think still we'll see a lot of applicants that are trying to ensure people would have a safe place to park, because I don't think I was like 36 years old before I got my first garage. I rented a long time, and I had my car broken into once in a while in San Jose and San Francisco. But I think we're going to see half the applicants want to provide that amenity, because a lot of folks that will pay $2,500 and higher a month in rent are going to expect some sort of garage type of activity. So you'll see a hybrid approach, I'm pretty sure. Those that are justifying high rent values and those that are, you know, trying to go with the other product types.
It's the other half that I think we need to target, you know. But I kind of like that concept, you know, if it goes right back to the gated communities, right? Because with the roll-up garage, or you have, basically it's secured parking. And that just lowers opportunities, crime statistics, those type of things like that. And that's really, but maybe the charging station might be somewhat of a kind of a backdoor method to keep that incentive in place. Just a thought.
It's just these are very expensive projects to build, and so I empathize with the development community. It can be what, $250,000 and up for a parking space at the end of the day, and so I think that's the tea leaves that Skinner came back when he talked to industry. Was they said, hey, if you could drop that, we could go vertical with more product, and that was, I think, the incentive at that high level. But we hear you out. If there's something that we can relate to, then we can look at that. But the state has already made this bed for garages.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Varun. Commissioner Harlan?
Yeah, no, just to tie into that, I agree with you on the crime, and especially where we are, just the weather. Having your car parked outside, I mean, it just gets beaten up, right? And you guys are a lot closer to the state pressures than we certainly are, right? That said, you know, is this a hill where you take a calculated risk, right? I mean, you look at Huntington Beach, Santa Barbara, Carmel by the Sea, Monterey, you know, some of those cities, and, you know, kind of outside of the box of what the state's asking for, and we're pretty much all in. Is this an opportunity to roll the dice a little bit on a couple of these and see where it gets, right? Because, you know, at the end of the day, I mean, you know, if you're Rob Bono, where are you going to focus with, right? Are you going after Murrieta over a garage requirement, or are you going after Huntington Beach?
Not to be rude, Commissioner Harlan, so the commission supported this policy, Action 19, 2 years ago, recommended it for approval to the city council, and the city council adopted it last month. So it's in our general plan. We can't take it out.
Got it.
I'm
Okay.
not receiving direction to take it out, so.
Commissioner, let's point out the obvious. Let's say we did something to get a letter from Attorney General Bonta. It wouldn't stop there. And you can look at how embarrassed Huntington Beach and other cities are. They're suddenly in the limelight. They'll be facing a $10,000 unit fine. They're going to be facing the loss of their transportation funding. So then we're going to be worried about how our road systems degrade more quicker. So if we mess with the state has plenty of levers to pull to make sure that we would probably regret that decision. I would also say that in this room, we're not policymakers. That's for city council. And I think we have to be very careful to not tease the state of California, because they're serious. They've gone after some cities with some strong legal letters, and I think you see those cities roll back pretty quickly on those threats. And that state, it will take over your land use. They will come in and say, you know what? We think we can do a better job than you guys are doing. And these are the kind of rezones and other things that you're going to be forced to do. So I appreciate that. We never want to just fold for state government, but at the same time, when I look at the penalty factors, that's worse than anything, because I really like the fact that we can provide playgrounds, schools, pave our roads. Those are the central things that we have to do for our citizenry. This is high-level politics, though. This is where Sacramento is very serious about going vertical on more development. It's very difficult to breathe. And we at the staff level have done everything we can to try to figure out a different path. Some of these things, though, are basically a line in the sand for the state. But I would just add that we want to be careful to try to operate in more of a compliant manner with these types of laws.
I appreciate those insights.
Thank you, Commissioner Harlan. Commissioner Wojcik?
Yeah, just along that line. In Chapter 4 of the housing element update, there's a section that talks about SCAG conducted an assessment to determine our share of housing needs. I always find it interesting when another agency tells us what we should be doing, right? But nevertheless, they did. And in their report, they determined that we need 1,000 units of very low income, 584 units of low income, 545 moderate income, and so on and so forth, to the point they said we need 3,000 total housing units. And not being privy to their report or their methodology, did staff look at that? Did staff have an opportunity to challenge it, or do you just say, yes, we'll take whatever you tell us?
No, we challenged it. So dialing back 4 years ago, yes, we challenged it. We sent a letter signed by the mayor of the city at the time and the development services director challenging their methodology. We were not supportive of it. We didn't support all of the analysis they had in there. I drafted that letter. Yeah, it didn't go anywhere. Essentially it's kind of common knowledge what happened at the meeting. There was a deal made essentially between a Riverside City council member who's not there anymore, the Mayor Garcetti of LA. They made kind of like a deal at the SCAG hearing, kind of shifted some units around, got SCAG to agree to the methodology, and that was it. And the city got what it got. I would say we got off better than some cities if you're looking at it that way. Our neighbors, both to the north and to the south, I would say got a harder end of the stick than we did. They've got a much tougher task to do. In a weird way, we kind of ended up getting dragged into the back and forth with HCD longer than some of the other cities. I don't know why. Maybe just the staff that we got from HCD. We had 3 different reviewers over the 2 years with HCD. No continuity of staff. They're scrambling. They're trying to do enforcement now. They're trying to ramp up on enforcement. That's another aspect of this. So to let you know, when we finish the ordinance, Taylor comes back to you here on the continued ordinance, we have to get it to council, and then we have to send it in to HCD, and they have to bless it and say, yeah, you did what we agreed to and is in your policy. And they could send it back to us and say, no, you still need to do something else. So we're doing our best to just kind of get this going. And I really appreciate the commission's time tonight, because there'll be more of these items. Obviously, this is 1-9, so there are other ones in one that will be coming to you, and other ones in other sections. So there's a lot of work to do here, and we'll need to sort of work together on this. We'll try to bring these to you in workshop format so we can have these discussions so you can understand where staff's coming from.
Thank you.
No other comments from the commissioners? Madam Secretary, are there any public comments? Thank you, Chair. There are no public comments. All right, then this is a receive and file. And thank you to the staff for all your hard work in putting together this workshop so that we would better understand what you're dealing with and what we as commissioners have the authority to do and not to do. And we appreciate it very much.
Yes, Chair Fisher, we appreciate the commission's time. We plan to come back with the EV and housing implementation ordinance, we think in about a month, towards the end of July, along with the multifamily objective standards. And those are 2 items from the housing implementation that we want to do. And there's more items to come. So we really appreciate your patience with us, and we'll work with you moving these forward.
With that note, let's continue to the city planner comments.
No comments, just looking forward to bringing these items back in July. And thank you to the commission for their time tonight, and wishing you all a happy 4th next week.
City attorney.
I have no comments.
No comments. Planning commission, any comments? I just want to note that I attended a visual planning commissioner training that was from 9 o'clock in the morning till 4:30 in the afternoon, which really was very informative and very much to what we're discussing in the housing element and CEQA and all of those things that are involved in the planning department. PlaceWorks was involved in it, and then the Institute for Local Government. So I just wanted to state that I attended that last week, and I thought it was a real excellent training that they gave virtually. And you did have time for breaks and lunch, even though it was an extended period of time. So I'm appreciative when we get something like that we can take advantage of it. I couldn't take advantage of going out of the city a while back, so I wanted to make sure that I got this virtual training. And with that, do we have any further business? And may I ask for a consensus for adjournment?
I'll make the motion to adjourn, yeah.
Second that motion? We're adjourned. Thank you very much.